betrayed by her pack, left to die in a frozen wasteland, but she refused to break. Tonight, witness the fall of an innocent Omega, framed for treason and cast into a killing storm by the very Alpha who swore to protect her. Watch as death circles closer, as hope freezes in her lungs, and as the impossible happens in the darkness. This is a story of survival, vengeance, and the rise of a power no one saw coming. Stay until the very end to see her final confrontation. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. The grand hall of the Blackstone Pack fell silent as the heavy oak doors slammed open, winter wind howling through the gap like the cry of a wounded animal. Every wolf in the chamber turned, their breaths misting in the sudden cold, eyes fixed on the slight figure being dragged between two massive enforcers. Arden Vale's knees scraped against the stone floor as they forced her forward, her wrists bound with silver-laced rope that burned her skin with each movement. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, pack members she'd grown up with, wolves she'd served alongside, children she'd helped raise. Now they looked at her with disgust, fear, or worse, nothing at all. "Bring her before the Alpha," commanded Marcus Thorne, the pack's beta, his voice dripping with barely concealed satisfaction. He'd never liked her, never approved of an Omega rising to a position of influence. Now, finally, he had his moment. At the far end of the hall, seated on the carved throne that had belonged to his father and grandfather before him, Alpha Ronin Black stared down at her with eyes as cold and gray as the storm gathering outside. Once those eyes had looked at her with warmth, with something that might have been affection. Once she dared to hope that the bond forming between them might grow into something real. Now there was nothing but ice. Arden Vale, Ronin's voice rang through the chamber, flat and emotionless. "You stand accused of treason against the Blackstone Pack, of conspiring to poison Luna Celine Ashford, bride to the Alpha, daughter of the Eastern Coalition. How do you answer these charges?" Arden forced herself to stand straight despite the weight of silver dragging at her wrists, despite the weakness flooding through her body from 3 days of confinement without food or water. She lifted her chin, meeting Ronin's gaze directly. "I am innocent, Alpha. I would never—" "Lies." The shriek came from the raised platform to Ronin's right, where Celine Ashford reclined on a cushioned chair, her perfect features twisted in theatrical anguish. "She tried to kill me. I saw her myself, pouring poison into my tea. She's jealous, obsessed with stealing what belongs to me." "That's not true." Arden's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "I brought you medicinal tea as I was ordered, the same herbs I've prepared 100 times before. Whatever made you ill, it wasn't enough." Ronin's single word cut through her defense like a blade. He stood, and the room seemed to shrink around his presence. At 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, the Alpha of Blackstone was a figure of raw power. "We have witness testimony. We have the evidence of the poisoned cup. We have Luna Celine's own account. But no investigation." Arden couldn't stop the words from tumbling out, even as Marcus's hand clamped down on her shoulder in warning. "No one has asked me to explain. No one has tested the tea. You're condemning me without what? Without listening to more lies from an Omega who forgot her place?" Marcus's fingers dug into her collarbone, his wolf surfacing just enough to make his grip bruising. "You were shown mercy when the Alpha took pity on you, gave you responsibilities beyond your station. And this is how you repay that kindness?" "I served this pack faithfully for 23 years. Arden's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the deadly quiet of the hall, everyone heard. "I tended your sick. I taught your children. I never asked for anything but to belong, to be useful. And now you throw it all away because she says so?" Her eyes found Celine's, and for just a moment she saw it. A flash of triumph quickly masked by false tears. This had been planned, orchestrated. But why? "The bond," Ronin said quietly, and Arden's heart stuttered. "You felt it forming between us. I felt it too." Hope sparked in her chest, desperate and painful. If he acknowledged the bond, if he could feel what she felt. But a bond with an Omega holds no political value. The Eastern Coalition requires a stronger alliance, one that will unite our territories and end decades of border conflict. Celine is the daughter of their Alpha Supreme. Our union will bring peace to thousands of wolves. The hope died as quickly as it had kindled. So you'll sacrifice an innocent pack member for politics? Arden heard her own voice as if from a distance, hollow and strange. I'll sacrifice whatever is necessary for the good of my pack. Ronan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Was it regret? Shame? It was gone before she could name it. And I cannot allow a traitor to live among us. Cannot let doubt poison our alliance before it's even begun. Then at least grant me a fair trial. Let me face my accuser properly with evidence and— You want evidence? Celine rose from her chair with fluid grace, every movement calculated for maximum effect. She approached Arden slowly, her silk gown whispering across the stones. When she was close enough that only Arden could hear her whispered words, she smiled. The evidence is wherever I say it is, little Omega. You never had a chance. Then, louder, for the assembled pack, she confessed to me in private, told me she couldn't bear to see me wed her precious Alpha, that she'd rather see me dead than bonded to Ronan. That's a lie, and you know it. Arden lunged forward, only to be yanked back by Marcus's iron grip. I never spoke to you in private. I barely know you. Desperate lies from a desperate wolf. Celine turned to Ronan, extending one delicate hand. My love, please. I can't bear to be in the same room with her any longer. The sight of her makes me ill all over again. Ronan took her hand, and Arden watched as he brought it to his lips, a gesture of comfort, of protection. The gesture she'd once dreamed he might offer her. Remove her from my sight, Ronan commanded, his voice hard. I, Ronan Black, Alpha of the Blackstone Pack, hereby reject you, Arden Vale. I sever any bond between us, deny any connection, and cast you out from pack protection. You are exiled, effective immediately, never to return on pain of death. The words hit like physical blows. Arden felt the nascent bond between them, that fragile thread of connection she'd treasured for months, snap with an almost audible crack. Pain exploded through her chest, driving her to her knees despite Marcus's grip. Her wolf howled inside her mind, a sound of pure anguish that echoed in the sudden emptiness where pack bonds had once hummed. No, she gasped, the word barely a breath. Please, no. But Ronan had already turned away. Take her beyond the northern border, he ordered without looking back. Strip her of pack markings. Leave her with nothing. Let the wilds have her. With pleasure, Alpha. Marcus hauled Arden to her feet, her legs barely supporting her weight. The rejection was still tearing through her system, her body trying to process the sudden severing of every connection she'd ever known. She felt untethered, floating, like she might simply dissipate into nothing. Through the haze of pain, she saw the faces of her pack, her former pack, watching impassively. Sarah Winters, who she'd sat with through 3 miscarriages, offering comfort through long nights. Thomas Creek, whose son she'd saved from drowning 2 summers ago. Elder Mora, who'd taught her to read, who'd called her little scholar with such fondness. None of them met her eyes. None of them spoke in her defense. She'd been erased as thoroughly as if she'd never existed. The enforcers dragged her through the hall, out into the courtyard where snow was already beginning to fall. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour, a killing cold that turned breath to ice crystals and froze exposed skin in minutes. They threw her against the stone wall of the healer's cottage, her cottage, until an hour ago, and Marcus pulled a silver knife from his belt. The Alpha said to remove pack markings, he said with a smile that made Arden's stomach turn. Hold her. The other enforcer, a young wolf named Derek, who'd once asked her to teach him herb lore, grabbed her arms and pinned them behind her back. Arden tried to struggle, but the silver bonds had sapped her strength. She could only watch as Marcus approached with the blade. He cut away her sleeve, exposing the pack tattoo on her upper arm. 3 interlocking circles representing unity, loyalty, and home. The symbol every Blackstone wolf wore with pride. Then he began to carve it away. Arden screamed as the silver blade sliced through her skin, burning and cutting simultaneously. Marcus worked with deliberate slowness, ensuring maximum pain, cutting deeper than necessary. Blood ran hot down her arm, steaming in the frigid air. Not so proud now, are you? He muttered, his breath hot against her face. Always thought you were special, didn't you? Close to the Alpha, trusted with important work. But you're just an Omega. Worthless. replaceable. When he finally stepped back, Arden's arm was a mangled mess of bleeding tissue. The tattoo was gone, along with a significant portion of her skin. "Strip her," Marcus ordered Derek, who hesitated for just a moment before obeying. They tore away her warm clothes, leaving her in only a thin shift that did nothing against the wind. Her boots were pulled off. Her cloak, the one gift Ronan had ever given her, ripped from her shoulders and thrown in the mud. "You can't leave her like this," Derek said quietly, his voice uncertain. "She'll freeze before she makes it a mile." "That's rather the point." Marcus grabbed Arden by her hair, forcing her to look at him. "The Alpha's mercy is swift. You should be grateful you're not hanging from the walls as a warning." He threw her forward into the snow, and Arden's bare feet touched ice for the first time. The cold was instant and absolute, shooting up through her legs like 1,000 knives. "Move," Marcus commanded. "North, toward the Badlands. If you stop, if you try to return, if you even look back, we'll hunt you down and make your death last for days." Arden tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The rejection, the pain, the shock, it was too much. She collapsed face first into the snow, the ice burning against her ravaged arm. Behind her, she heard the gates of Blackstone close with a sound like a death knell. For a long moment, she simply lay there, watching her blood stain the pristine snow red. It would be easy to just stop, to let the cold take her, to surrender to the darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. What did she have to live for? Her pack was gone. Her home was gone. The man she'd thought might love her had thrown her away like garbage. "Let it end," her wolf whispered, exhausted and broken. "Let it be over." But somewhere deeper, in a place that rejection and pain couldn't quite reach, something else stirred. Something that had kept her alive through a childhood as an orphan, through years of being overlooked and underestimated, through countless small cruelties from wolves who thought omegas were worth less than dirt. Spite, maybe. Or stubbornness. Or just the simple animal refusal to die. One more night, she thought, forcing her hands beneath her, pushing up through the snow. Survive one more night, then decide if tomorrow is worth seeing. Her fingers were already going numb, but she made them work. She crawled forward, then stumbled to her feet, swaying like a drunk. The northern Badlands stretched before her, an endless expanse of white broken only by skeletal trees and jagged rock formations. No shelter, no food, no hope. She started walking anyway. The wind picked up as night fell, transforming from cold to brutal. Snow that had been falling gently now drove horizontal, each flake a tiny blade against her exposed skin. Arden's shift was soaked through within minutes, frozen stiff against her body. Her feet had gone from painful to numb to something beyond sensation entirely. She walked because walking was all she could do. Time became meaningless. She might have been walking for hours or minutes. There was no way to tell in the whiteout conditions. Her mind began to drift, hallucinating warmth where there was only cold, seeing lights in the distance that vanished when she blinked. "This is how it ends," she thought distantly. "Frozen in the Badlands, forgotten by everyone who ever knew my name." Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow. A root, a rock, it didn't matter. She fell hard, her wounded arm striking the ground with a fresh burst of agony. This time she couldn't get up. The cold had stolen too much, gone too deep. Arden curled into a ball, trying uselessly to conserve heat that was already gone. Her eyes drifted closed, then they snapped open again. No. The word echoed in her mind with sudden crystalline clarity. No. I refuse to die like this. I refuse to let them win. With trembling hands made clumsy by cold, Arden began to dig in the snow. There. The root she'd tripped over was part of a fallen tree, its trunk creating a small hollow beneath. Not much, but better than nothing. She crawled into the space, using her body to pack snow around the opening, creating a crude windbreak. Then she began to search her surroundings with desperate focus. Dead grass poking through the snow. She grabbed it by the handful, stuffing it against her body for insulation. Dry leaves caught in the hollow. She gathered them with shaking fingers. A broken branch still attached to the trunk. She worked it back and forth until it snapped free. Fire. She needed fire. Her shift had a single button, steel, not silver, thank the fates. She tore it free and used a rock to reshape it, creating a crude striker. The dead grass became tinder. The branch became kindling, and deep in the pocket of her shift, forgotten until now, she found a small piece of flint she'd picked up weeks ago while gathering herbs. Her hands were so numb she could barely feel the materials. Her vision kept blurring. Twice, 3 times. She dropped the flint and had to search blindly through the snow to find it again. But she refused to give up. Strike, strike, strike. On the 47th attempt, she counted each one, using the numbers to keep herself focused. A spark caught. It was so small she almost didn't see it, just a tiny ember glowing in the nest of dry grass. Arden bent close, breathing life into it with exhalations that made her lightheaded. The ember grew, caught, spread to the leaves, crept up the kindling. Flame. She almost sobbed at the sight of it, that small miracle of heat and light in the endless cold. She fed it carefully, adding larger sticks piece by piece, building a fire that was pathetically small but might, just might, keep her alive until morning. As feeling returned to her extremities, the pain was excruciating. Frostbite nipped at her toes and fingers. Her wounded arm throbbed with every heartbeat. But she was alive. For now, impossibly, she was alive. Arden huddled close to her tiny fire, feeding it constantly, watching the darkness beyond the hollow. The storm raged on, but her small shelter held. Her fire burned. She would survive this night, and tomorrow. Tomorrow she would figure out how to survive the next one. Hours passed in a haze of cold and pain. Arden drifted in and out of consciousness, jerking awake each time the fire began to die, adding more wood with mechanical determination. Her awareness had narrowed to 3 things. Keep the fire burning, stay conscious, don't let the cold take her. She didn't notice when the wind changed direction. She didn't notice when the snow stopped falling. She didn't notice the shapes moving in the darkness beyond her fire's small circle of light, but she noticed when they stepped into the glow. Wolves. Not the familiar shapes of pack members in their animal forms. These were different, larger, wilder. Their eyes reflected the firelight with an amber glow that was almost hypnotic, their fur thick and frost-tipped. 5 of them, no, 6, more emerging from the storm with silent, predatory grace. Arden's breath caught. This was it then. She'd survived the cold only to be torn apart by wild wolves. The irony would have been funny if she'd had the energy to laugh. The largest wolf, a massive male with a scar across one eye, approached first. His lips pulled back from teeth that looked designed for crushing bone. Arden grabbed a burning branch from her fire, holding it out with shaking hands. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice cracked and hoarse from screaming earlier. "I won't die easy." The wolf paused, its head tilting as if considering her words. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lay down. Right there, just outside the hollow, its body creating a windbreak between her and the storm. One by one, the other wolves did the same. They formed a living wall around her shelter, their combined body heat creating a pocket of warmth that her small fire alone could never have achieved. Arden stared at them in shock, the burning branch falling from her numb fingers. This wasn't normal behavior. Wild wolves didn't protect strange humans. They certainly didn't arrange themselves like a military unit guarding a position. "What are you?" she breathed. The scarred wolf's eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that made her heart stop. Intelligence, ancient and absolute. Then the wolf closed its eyes, its breathing deepening into sleep, and Arden was left wondering if she'd hallucinated the whole thing. But the warmth was real. The protection was real. And for the first time since her rejection, the hollow emptiness inside her felt just a little less vast. She fed her fire. She watched her unlikely guardians. And slowly, as exhaustion finally claimed her, Arden Vale closed her eyes and slept. When she woke, the world had changed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of pristine white under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The sun was high, midday, maybe later. She'd slept for hours, and the wolves were gone. Arden sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. Her arm was swollen, the carved flesh angry and infected. Her feet were worse, black in places, white in others, the telltale signs of severe frostbite. She would likely lose toes, maybe more. But she was alive. Her fire had burned down to embers, but the hollow was still warm. More than that, there was a deer carcass lying at the entrance, freshly killed, steam still rising from the torn throat. The wolves had left her food. Arden crawled to it on hands and knees, too weak to stand. She had no tools, no knife, but desperation made her creative. She used sharp stones to cut away strips of meat, eating it raw because she had no other choice. The blood and flesh made her stomach revolt at first, but her body needed fuel more than it needed dignity. She ate until she was sick, then ate more. She couldn't carry the whole carcass, but she could prepare. Using the deer's own bones as tools, she fashioned crude cutting implements. She stripped away hide that she could use for warmth. She built up her fire and began to smoke thin strips of meat, trail food that might keep her alive for a few more days. It was while she was working, her hands bloody and her focus absolute, that she heard them. Voices. Coming from the south. Arden froze, her heart hammering. Pack hunters. Had they come to finish the job? "Tracks go cold here," a male voice said, deep and commanding. "The storm covered everything." "Good." A second voice, harder. "Let them think she died."
"It's cleaner that way." "You sure about this, Kyle? She's Omega. She might not—" She survived a rejection, exile, and a killing storm, and built a fire with frostbitten hands. "I'm sure." Arden grabbed a stone sharp enough to use as a weapon and pressed herself back into the hollow, barely breathing. Two figures emerged from the tree line, men, both tall and battle-scarred, dressed in furs and leather armor that marked them as warriors, but no pack insignia, no territorial markers. Rogues. The one called Kale was in front, and Arden's breath caught as she recognized the scar across his eye. The wolf, the scarred wolf, had been him. "Arden Vale," Kyle said, his voice carrying clearly across the small clearing. "You can come out. We're not here to hurt you." "Forgive me if I don't trust easily anymore," Arden called back, her voice steadier than she felt. "The last wolves who promised I was safe tried to kill me." A smile flickered across Kyle's scarred face. "Fair enough. But if we wanted you dead, you'd have frozen last night. We kept you alive for a reason." "What reason?" "To offer you a choice." Slowly, keeping her improvised weapon visible, Arden emerged from the hollow. In the daylight, she could see just how battered she was, her shift torn and bloody, her feet wrapped in strips of deer hide, her arm a disaster of infection and damaged tissue. But she stood straight. She met Kyle's eyes directly. "I'm listening," she said. Kale studied her for a long moment, and Arden had the strange sense of being measured against some invisible standard. Finally, he nodded as if satisfied. "You were framed," he said bluntly. "Celine Ashford poisoned her own tea, blamed you, and manipulated your alpha into exile rather than execution because a public trial would have revealed too many inconsistencies. The Eastern Coalition wants Blackstone's territory, and the easiest way to claim it is through marriage alliance. They needed you gone because your bond with Ronan, however weak, was still a complication." Arden's knees went weak. "How do you know this?" "Because we've been watching the Blackstone pack for months, watching their corruption, their greed, their willingness to sacrifice the innocent for political gain." Kale's expression hardened. "You're not the first pack member they've thrown away. You're just the first one we reached in time." "We?" Arden looked between the two men. "Who are you?" "Kale Draven," he said simply, as if the name should mean something. When Arden's expression remained blank, he smiled slightly. "Former commander of the Northern Legion, presumed dead in the border wars 5 years ago." The name clicked. Arden had heard stories, whispered tales of a legendary warrior who disappeared during the conflict with the Western Territories, taking his entire unit with him, assumed killed, mourned as heroes. "You're not dead," she said stupidly. "No, we're just selective about which wolves know we're alive." Kale gestured to his companion. "This is Marcus Thorne, different Marcus than the bastard who cut you. We've been building something in the deep wilds, away from pack politics and alpha egos. A place for wolves who've been cast out, betrayed, or abandoned by the system." "You want me to join a rogue pack?" Arden's voice was flat. Rogues were dangerous, unpredictable. Living outside pack structure drove wolves mad eventually. Not a rogue pack, a army. Kale's eyes gleamed with an intensity that made Arden's wolf sit up and take notice despite her exhaustion. We're preparing for war, Arden. War against the corruption that's rotting the pack system from the inside, and we want you with us. I'm an Omega. What use could I possibly be in a war? You survived the unsurvivable. You built fire with frozen hands when you should have been dead.
You ate raw meat and fashioned tools from bone because giving up wasn't an option. Kyle took a step closer. That's not Omega weakness. That's warrior strength. And more than that, you know Blackstone's inner workings. You know their weaknesses, their routines, their secrets. You want information. Arden's stomach turned. You want me to betray my pack. They already betrayed you, Marcus, the new Marcus, said quietly. They carved your skin, cast you into a storm, and left you to die. What loyalty do you owe them now? Arden opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Because he was right. The wolves she'd served faithfully for 23 years had thrown her away without a second thought. Why should she protect them? But still, what you're talking about is treason, she said slowly. An attack on a recognized pack. The Council of Alphas would... The Council is part of the problem. Kale's voice was hard. They protect their own, maintain the status quo, and crush anyone who threatens their power. Justice doesn't exist for wolves like us, Arden, so we make our own. He extended his hand. Come with us. Train, heal, get strong enough that no one can ever throw you away again. And when the time comes, help us tear down the system that tried to kill you. Arden stared at his hand. This was madness. Joining rogues, planning revenge, abandoning everything she'd ever known about pack law and hierarchy, it went against every instinct she'd been raised with. But those instincts had led her to trust Ronan, to believe in the pack's justice, to think that loyalty would be rewarded. And where had that gotten her? Arden reached out, her ravaged hand gripping Kael's calloused one. One condition, she said, her voice steady despite the enormousness of what she was choosing. When this is done, when whatever war you're planning happens, I want to face Ronan myself. I want him to see exactly what he threw away. Kael's smile was fierce and approving. Deal. As they turned north, away from Blackstone and toward whatever waited in the deep wilds, Arden looked back one final time at the territory she'd called home. The snow-covered landscape looked peaceful, beautiful even, but she knew what lay beneath that pristine surface. Blood. Betrayal. Lies dressed up as justice. She wouldn't freeze in these badlands. She would burn through them. And when she returned, and she would return, the whole pack would learn what it meant to cast out an Omega who refused to stay down. The fire she'd built to survive the night was nothing compared to the one beginning to burn inside her now. The journey north took 3 days that felt like 3 lifetimes. Kael and Marcus moved through the wilderness with the efficiency of wolves who knew every stone and shadow, but they adjusted their pace for Arden's damaged feet. She hated needing the accommodation, hated the weakness it represented, but pride wouldn't carry her if her legs gave out. We could shift, Marcus suggested on the second day, watching her limp across a frozen stream. Carry you the rest of the way. No. Arden's voice was firm, despite the agony shooting up her calves with each step. I walk on my own, or I don't arrive at all. Kael glanced back at her, something like approval flickering across his scarred features. Stubborn. You have no idea. They traveled in silence after that, speaking only when necessary. Arden used the quiet to observe her new companions, cataloging details with the same careful attention she'd once given to herb identification. Kael moved like violence contained in flesh, every gesture precise, economical, lethal. Marcus was broader, slower, but his eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. Both men carried weapons she didn't recognize, blades that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. On the third day, as the sun reached its zenith, they crested a ridge, and Arden saw it. The hollow. She'd expected a rough camp, maybe some caves or crude shelters. Instead, a fortified compound sprawled across a hidden valley, protected on 3 sides by sheer cliffs, and on the 4th by a palisade wall that rose 20 feet high. Watchtowers flanked the main gate, and even from this distance Arden could see armed sentries moving with military precision. How many? She breathed. 237, as of yesterday, Kael said. We gain new recruits every week, wolves who've been cast out, betrayed, or simply gotten tired of alpha politics. They come here to disappear. Or to become something new, Marcus added. As they descended the ridge, a horn sounded from the watchtower. 3 short blasts that Arden assumed meant friendlies approaching. The gate swung open before they reached it, revealing a muscular woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that could cut glass. "Commander?" She nodded to Kyle, then her gaze shifted to Arden. "This the Omega from Blackstone?" "Arden Vale," Kale confirmed. "Arden, this is Captain Vera Steele. She runs day-to-day operations." Vera's assessment was thorough and uncomfortable, taking in every detail of Arden's battered appearance. "She looks half dead." "She survived a killing storm with frostbitten feet and no supplies. She built fire with bare hands and fashioned weapons from bone." Kale's voice held an edge of challenge. "She's tougher than she looks." "She'd have to be." Vera stepped aside, gesturing them through. "Healer's station first. Then Commander can explain why he dragged another broken Omega into our stronghold." The words stung, but Arden bit back her retort. Let them underestimate her. She'd survived worse than doubt. Inside the walls, the compound buzzed with activity that spoke of discipline and purpose. Warriors drilled in a training yard, their movements synchronized and brutal. Craftsmen worked at forges and workshops, producing weapons and armor. A group of younger wolves, teenagers maybe, practiced hand-to-hand combat under the watchful eye of an instructor who barked corrections like artillery fire. Everyone stopped to stare as they passed. Arden felt their eyes like physical weight, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. "Omega. Fresh exile. Won't last a week." She kept her head high, her stride as even as her damaged feet would allow. The healer's station occupied a large wooden building near the compound's center. Inside, the sharp scent of antiseptic and herbs made Arden's nose twitch with sense memory. This had been her world once, before it was stolen. An older man with kind eyes and scarred hands looked up from grinding something in a mortar. "Kyle, what damage have you brought me today?" "Severe frostbite, infected lacerations, possible hypothermia after effects, rejection shock, and malnutrition." Kyle rattled off the list like a combat report. "How long to get her functional?" "That depends on her." The healer, no introduction offered, gestured Arden toward an examination table. "Sit. Let me see the feet." Arden unwrapped the deer hide strips she'd been using as bandages, revealing the full extent of the damage. 3 toes on her left foot were black, the tissue clearly dead. The right foot was better, but still showed patches of white and gray that might or might not recover. The healer's expression didn't change. "You'll lose the 3 on the left. Maybe more if infection has spread into the foot proper. The right might heal, but you'll never have full sensation back." "Can I walk?" That was all that mattered. Eventually, with significant pain and probably a permanent limp, he met her eyes directly. "Most wolves in your position would accept amputation below the ankle and fit a prosthetic. Cleaner, faster healing, better long-term function." "No." The word came out harder than Arden intended. "They already took everything else. They don't get my feet too. Even if keeping them means chronic pain, limited mobility." Even then, the healer studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Your choice. But understand, I'll do what I can to save viable tissue, but if gangrene sets in, you won't have a choice. I'll take the foot to save your life." "Understood." He worked in silence after that, cleaning wounds with solutions that burned like liquid fire, debriding dead tissue with a scalpel that moved with practiced precision. Arden gritted her teeth and didn't make a sound, even when he began removing the 3 blackened toes with quick, efficient cuts. Kyle watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. When the healer finally wrapped her feet in clean bandages and moved to examine her arm, Arden's control nearly broke. The carved flesh had festered badly, infection spreading in angry red lines up toward her shoulder. The healer's jaw tightened, silver poisoning in the tissue. "Whoever did this wanted you to suffer." He reached for a bottle of clear liquid that smelled like death. "This is going to hurt worse than the feet." He wasn't lying. Arden's vision whited out as he flushed the wound with what felt like molten silver, her wolf howling in agony inside her mind. She felt hands holding her down, Marcus on one side, Vera on the other, their grips iron-strong as her body convulsed. Through the haze of pain, she heard the healer's voice. "Beta Marcus did this?" "Yes," she gasped. "He's a dead man walking." Vera's voice was cold. "No one carves pack markings like this. It's torture, pure and simple." "Add it to his list of crimes," Kyle said quietly. "When we move on Blackstone, Marcus Thorne is mine." The treatment took 2 hours that felt like days. When it was finally over, Arden slumped on the table, her body shaking with exhaustion and residual pain. Her arm was wrapped in layers of bandages infused with herbs she recognized: golden seal, calendula, yarrow. Good choices for infection and tissue healing. 3 days of bed rest minimum, the healer said, washing blood from his hands. Then we'll see if you can put weight on those feet. No. Arden forced herself upright despite the protest of every muscle. I didn't survive exile to waste 3 days lying down. What do I need to do to be useful here? The room went quiet. Vera's eyes narrowed. You can barely stand. I can sit. I can use my hands. I know herbs and healing. Arden met the healer's gaze directly. You've got 200 warriors here. How many healers? 3, counting myself. So you're understaffed, overworked, and dealing with constant injuries from training and patrol duty. Arden gestured at the cluttered workspace, the backed-up orders visible in stacked requisition forms. I can help. Even sitting down. Even one-handed. I can grind medicines, prepare poultices, organize supplies. The healer looked at Kyle, who shrugged. Your station, your call. A slow smile crossed the old man's face. I'm Healer Garrett. And if you can make yourself useful without bleeding on my clean floors, Omega, you're welcome to try. Arden spent the next 3 days proving herself in the only way she knew how, through relentless grinding work. She couldn't stand for long periods, so she sat on a stool and organized Garrett's chaotic supply closet, cataloging herbs and medicines with the same meticulous attention she'd once given to Blackstone's healing cottage. She ground medicines with her good hand, the mortar and pestle becoming an extension of her arm. She mixed poultices and salves, her nose recognizing ingredients even when labels had faded. And she listened. Warriors came through with training injuries, sprained ankles, split knuckles, pulled muscles. Garrett treated them efficiently, but Arden heard the conversations that happened around the healer's station. Complaints about the latest drill sergeant, speculation about when they'd finally move against one of the corrupt packs, questions about the new Omega and whether she was a spy. I heard she was Ronan Black's mate, one young warrior said while Garrett wrapped his dislocated shoulder. That's why she's really here, to report back. Don't be stupid, his companion retorted. Ronan rejected her. Why would she go back? Maybe she's playing the long game. Seduce the commander, learn our secrets, sell us out when the price is right. Arden's hand stilled on the lavender she was stripping, but she didn't look up. Garrett, however, cleared his throat loudly. If she wanted to betray us, she wouldn't be spending 12-hour days organizing my supply closet for no pay. Use your brain, soldier. The warriors left shortly after, but their suspicion lingered like smoke. Arden felt it everywhere she went, in the way conversation stopped when she approached, in the sidelong glances that followed her limping progress across the compound, in the deliberate distance others maintained. She was an outsider here, tolerated because Kyle commanded it, but not trusted, not wanted. On the 4th day, Garrett declared her feet healed enough for short walks. 15 minutes at a time, no more. And if you feel sharp pain rather than dull ache, stop immediately. Arden nodded and immediately headed for the training yard. She'd been watching it from the healer's station windows, observing the drills with the same focus she'd once given to studying herb properties. The warriors here fought differently than Blackstone wolves, more aggressive, more creative, willing to use tactics that pack wolves would consider dishonorable. Vera was running today's session, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Again, you telegraphed that right hook from yesterday. By the time it lands, your opponent has already gutted you. A young male wolf, barely 20, all lean muscle and nervous energy, reset his stance and tried again. Vera slipped his punch with minimal effort and swept his legs, sending him crashing to the dirt. Dead. Next. Arden watched for an hour, leaning against the yard's fence to take weight off her feet. The patterns became clear. Vera was teaching counterintuitive responses to standard pack fighting techniques. Instead of meeting strength with strength, these warriors learned to redirect, to use an opponent's momentum against them, to exploit the predictable nature of traditional combat. "You disapprove!" Arden nearly jumped. Kael had materialized beside her with the silence of a hunting cat. "No," she said carefully. "I'm just trying to understand. Pack combat emphasizes honor, fair fights, established rules. This is effective." Kael's voice was flat. "In a real fight, honor gets you killed. Rules are for wolves who have the luxury of civilization." "Is that what you're training them for? Real fights?" "I'm training them to survive wars that alphas start and foot soldiers die in." He turned to look at her directly. "You spent 23 years as an Omega in a pack structure. You know how it works. Alphas make decisions, betas enforce them, and Omegas survive in the cracks. Tell me I'm wrong." Arden wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because he wasn't wrong. She'd spent her entire life being useful enough to keep, invisible enough to ignore. The moment she'd become inconvenient, she'd been discarded. "Why did you really bring me here?" she asked quietly. "You said information about Blackstone, but you could have extracted that and left me in the wilds. Why take the risk of bringing an Omega into your stronghold?" Kyle was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the training warriors. 5 years ago, I commanded 300 wolves in the Northern Legion. We were sent to secure border territories during the Western conflicts. Standard military operation, or so we were told. His voice went flat, emotionless in the way that meant the emotions were too large to show. Turned out we were bait. The Alpha Council wanted to provoke the Western packs into open war, so they sent us into contested territory with outdated intelligence and no backup. When the ambush came, we called for reinforcements. They never arrived. Arden's breath caught. "We lost 214 wolves that day. Good wolves, loyal wolves, warriors who believed the packs would protect them because that's what we're raised to believe." Kael's jaw tightened. The survivors were told to keep quiet. The council declared us heroes, gave our families compensation, and buried the truth so deep it might as well have never existed. "But you didn't stay quiet." "I tried to. For almost a year, I tried to believe the lies, to accept that sometimes wolves die in war, and that's just the cost." His eyes met hers, and Arden saw something terrible in their depths, a cold rage that had been burning for 5 years. "Then I found out the Alpha who sent us into that ambush got promoted, rewarded for his strategic brilliance in containing the Western threat. So you disappeared." "So I gathered the survivors who wanted justice more than they wanted pack acceptance, and we disappeared. We've spent 5 years building this place, gathering wolves who've been betrayed by the system, preparing for the day we're strong enough to tear down the corruption at its roots." He turned back to the training yard where Vera had moved on to weapons training. "I brought you here because you're like every wolf in this compound. Someone the packs threw away because you were inconvenient. And I believe that when the time comes, when we finally move against the alphas who think they're untouchable, you'll fight harder than anyone because you know exactly what they're capable of." Arden processed this, her mind racing. "You're planning a war, an actual war against the pack system. I'm planning justice. If that requires war, so be it. And if I wanted no part of it, if I just wanted to disappear?" Kael's smile was sharp. "Then you're free to leave any time. We don't keep prisoners here, but I don't think that's what you want." "You don't know what I want." "Don't I?" He gestured at the training yard. "You've been watching these drills for 4 days, cataloging techniques, identifying patterns. You're not watching out of curiosity, Arden. You're watching because you're trying to figure out how to fight back." He was right, and they both knew it. "I'm an Omega," Arden said quietly. "I'm not built for combat." "Omega is a designation, not a life sentence. You think every wolf in that yard was born a warrior?" Kael shook his head. "Half of them were Omegas in their original packs, dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. We taught them to weaponize that." Before Arden could respond, a commotion erupted at the main gate. The horn blasted, not the friendly pattern from before, but a harsh, urgent wail that made warriors drop their training weapons and reach for real ones. Vera was moving before the sound faded, barking orders. Alpha formation! Weapons ready! Someone get the commander! I'm here! Kale was already running toward the gate, and Arden found herself limping after him despite the screaming pain in her feet. The gate swung open to reveal a scene that made Arden's stomach drop. 3 wolves staggered through, all of them bloodied and barely conscious. 2 more warriors carried a 4th between them, this one unconscious and bleeding from what looked like claw wounds across his chest. Report, Kyle commanded, catching the lead wolf before he collapsed. Ambush. 3 miles south. The wolf's words came in gasps. 6 Blackstone hunters. They were specifically looking for us, knew exactly where to wait. Arden's blood went cold. That's impossible. Your patrols rotate routes, and she stopped as every eye in the compound turned to her. And how exactly would you know our patrol patterns, Omega? Vera's voice was dangerous. You've been here 4 days. You've spent most of that time in the healer's station or watching training. So how do you know anything about our security protocols? I don't. I just assumed. You assumed based on what? Information you gathered? Messages you sent? Vera's hand dropped to her blade. Maybe our new recruit isn't as broken as she pretended. Maybe Blackstone sent her here for exactly this reason. That's insane! Arden backed up, her damaged feet sending jolts of agony up her legs. I was exiled, rejected. They tried to kill me. Or they let you think that. Vera was advancing now, and other warriors were closing in, forming a circle. Good way to gain sympathy, isn't it? Play the victim, get brought into our stronghold, map our defenses, and lead your real pack right to our door. Kale, tell them... But Kale's face was unreadable, his eyes assessing. How did Blackstone know where to find our patrol? The question hung in the air like a blade. I don't know, Arden said desperately. I swear I don't know. I haven't sent messages, haven't communicated with anyone. I've been with Garrett the whole time. Garrett? Vera's laugh was ugly. The healer who has access to supplies, to visiting wounded, to information about who's out on patrol? Perfect position for a spy, actually. Check me, Arden pleaded, turning to Kyle. Search my things, monitor my movements, do whatever you need to do. I'm not a spy. I would never... Intentions don't matter if the result is the same. Kale's voice was cold, Commander flat. 4 of my wolves are wounded and Blackstone hunters found a patrol route that was supposed to be secure. Either you're a spy or you brought attention we can't afford. I didn't... Lock her in the detention block, Kale ordered. No visitors, no communication. Marcus, I want every message intercepted, every conversation she's had reviewed. If there's a leak, I want it found. 2 warriors grabbed Arden's arms, and she didn't resist. What would be the point? They'd already decided she was guilty. As they dragged her across the compound, she caught glimpses of faces. Some satisfied, some uncertain, none sympathetic. The healer's station door was closed, Garrett nowhere in sight. Even the wounded she'd treated looked away. The detention block was a stone building at the compound's edge, cold and dark, and smelling of damp. They threw her into a cell barely large enough to lie down in, and the door slammed with a finality that echoed in her bones. Arden sank to the floor, her feet screaming, her arm throbbing, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd escaped one betrayal only to walk straight into another. Hours passed, maybe days. There was no window in the cell, no way to track time except by the guards' shift changes. They brought food and water irregularly, shoving it through a slot in the door without speaking. No one came to interrogate her. No one came to explain. She was simply forgotten. Arden's mind raced through possibilities. How had Blackstone found the patrol? It couldn't have been her. She genuinely had no way to communicate. But the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone had talked. Someone had given information. But who would benefit from making her look like a spy? The answer hit her with sickening clarity. Anyone who wanted to undermine Kyle's leadership. Anyone who thought bringing in an exile was a mistake. Anyone who wanted to prove the commander was going soft, making bad calls, putting the compound at risk. She'd been used. Again. On what might have been the 3rd day, she'd lost count, the cell door finally opened. Arden squinted against the sudden light, expecting guards or Vera's cold fury. Instead, Kyle stood in the doorway. Get up, he said quietly. We need to talk. Arden struggled to her feet, her damaged limbs protesting after days of inactivity. Kyle didn't offer help, just watched as she limped out of the cell and followed him down a corridor to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. Sit. She sat. Kale remained standing, his expression unreadable. Marcus reviewed every conversation you've had since arriving. Garrett confirmed you never left the healer's station except under direct observation. We searched your belongings, all 2 items you own, and found nothing. His jaw tightened. You're not the spy. Relief flooded through Arden, so intense it made her dizzy. Then why? Because someone is, and that someone chose the perfect moment to act right after you arrived, when suspicion would naturally fall on the newcomer. Kale's eyes were hard. You were a convenient scapegoat. Who? We're still investigating, but whoever it is, they're good. The intelligence Blackstone received was detailed, current, and specific. It came from inside this compound. Arden's mind raced. You said half your warriors were former Omegas. What about the other half? Betas mostly. A few Alphas who got tired of politics. All vetted personally by me or Vera. But vetting doesn't catch everything, does it? Someone who wants to go home bad enough might make a deal, information in exchange for reinstatement, or someone with families still in packed territories might be under pressure to cooperate. Kale studied her with new intensity. You've thought about this. I've had 3 days to do nothing but think. Arden leaned forward despite her exhaustion. You said this compound gains new recruits every week. That means constant influx, constant change. How do you really know who's loyal? We test them. How? Combat trials? Oaths of loyalty? Arden shook her head. Those don't catch someone who's desperate or scared or being blackmailed. You need to look at who has access to patrol schedules, who's been acting differently recently, who might have reasons to want back into pack society. You're describing a witch hunt. I'm describing survival. Arden met his eyes directly. Someone in your compound sold out that patrol. If you don't find them, they'll do it again. And next time, more wolves will die. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out the second chair and sat down, the first time he'd been at her level since the conversation started. Vera wants you exiled, says you're more trouble than you're worth, spy or not. What do you want? I want to know if you're still interested in that deal we made. The one where you help us tear down the system and get your revenge on Ronan. Arden thought about the cell, the suspicion, the isolation, thought about how easy it would be to just walk away, to disappear into the wilds and never deal with pack politics again. Then she thought about Ronan's cold eyes as he rejected her, Celine's triumphant smile, Marcus's blade carving away her identity, the pack that had thrown her away like garbage. I'm interested, she said quietly, but on new terms. Kale's eyebrow rose. You're negotiating from a prison cell? I'm negotiating from reality. You need information about Blackstone. I can give you that. But more than that, you need someone who understands Omega networks, who knows how information really flows in pack structures. She leaned forward. Warriors talk. Alphas command. But Omegas see everything because everyone ignores us. We're invisible until we're needed. You're proposing what exactly? Make me your intelligence officer. Let me build a network of Omegas across pack territories. Wolves who are invisible, overlooked, underestimated. They'll gather information no warrior could ever access because no one thinks to guard their words around an Omega. Kale studied her for a long, considering moment. That's ambitious and dangerous. Everything about this place is dangerous, but if you're serious about taking down corrupt alphas, you need to know what they're planning before they act. Warriors can destroy, but Omegas can infiltrate. Vera will never approve. Vera doesn't have to like me. She just has to accept that I'm useful. Arden held his gaze. You brought me here because you saw something. Either you were right or you made a mistake. Which is it? The silence stretched between them, taut and heavy. Then Kyle stood. Report to my office tomorrow at dawn. We'll discuss the parameters of your new position. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Arden, if this goes wrong, if you betray us or compromise this compound, I won't be merciful. Understood? Understood. As the door closed behind him, Arden allowed herself one moment of shaking relief. Then she pushed it down, buried it deep where weakness couldn't find it. She'd been given a second chance. She wouldn't waste it. But first, she had a spy to catch. The spy turned out to be a 24-year-old beta named Corin Ash, recruited 3 months earlier from a dissolved pack in the Eastern Territories. He cracked after 2 days of Arden's quiet, methodical questioning. Not through torture or threats, but through something far more insidious: empathy. "You miss them," Arden had said softly, watching him across the interrogation table. "Your family. They're still in Blackstone territory, aren't they? Under Alpha Ronan's protection." Corin's hands had trembled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Someone approached you, offered to keep your family safe if you just provided a little information. Patrol routes, defensive positions, nothing that would really hurt anyone." Arden leaned forward. "They made it sound reasonable, harmless even, and you were so desperate to protect the people you loved that you believed them." He'd broken then, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, and confessed everything. The Blackstone beta, who'd contacted him through coded messages and supply shipments. The promises that his mother and sister would be left alone if he cooperated. The gradual escalation from minor intelligence to critical tactical information. "I didn't mean for those wolves to get hurt," Corin whispered. "They said it was just reconnaissance. They said no one would get killed." "They lied," Arden said flatly. "They always lie." Kyle had wanted immediate execution. Vera had argued for public trial and exile. But Arden had proposed something different. "Let me use him," she'd said in Kyle's office, ignoring Vera's glare. "Feed false information back through his contact. Make Blackstone think they still have eyes inside our compound." "That's insane," Vera snapped. "He's proven he can't be trusted." "Exactly. Which means Blackstone won't suspect we've flipped him. We control what intelligence they receive, and we learn about their operations in the process." Arden met Kyle's eyes. "It's called a double agent, and if we play it right, we can use Blackstone's own spy network against them." Kale had studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it. But Vera supervises every communication. One hint of betrayal, and Corin dies. Understood?" "Understood." That had been 2 weeks ago. Now Arden stood in what had become her office, a cramped room near Kyle's command center, reviewing the latest intelligence Corin had accidentally let slip to his Blackstone handler: false patrol schedules, incorrect supply routes, imaginary defensive weaknesses, each piece carefully crafted to make Blackstone overconfident and reckless. "They're taking the bait." Marcus, the good Marcus, entered without knocking, dropping a decoded message on her desk. "Blackstone's planning a raid on our southern outpost in 3 days. They think it's lightly defended. But it's not." Arden traced the message with one finger. "How many warriors do we have in position?" 40, hidden in the caves above the outpost. "When Blackstone attacks, we'll have high ground and superior numbers." Marcus grinned. "It'll be a massacre." "No." The word came out sharper than Arden intended. "No massacre." Marcus's smile faded. "They tried to kill you. They're coming to destroy us. What exactly do you suggest? We ask them nicely to leave?" "I suggest we capture as many as possible. Dead wolves can't give information. But prisoners?" Arden stood, her feet still aching but functional after weeks of healing. "Prisoners can tell us everything about Blackstone's defensive plans, troop movements, and most importantly, they can tell us about the Eastern Coalition's involvement." "You want to interrogate Blackstone warriors?" Marcus's voice was skeptical. "They'll die before they betray their pack." "Maybe, but I wasn't thinking about interrogating warriors." Arden pulled out a map of the Blackstone territory, marked with her own careful notations. "Every raid needs support staff. Someone has to prepare supplies, coordinate communication, arrange transportation. Those positions are almost always filled by Omegas." "So?" "So Omegas don't have the same loyalty warriors do. We're expendable, remember? If things go wrong, we're the first ones blamed." Arden's smile was cold. "Capture the Omega support staff, treat them with the respect their own pack never showed them, and watch how quickly they start talking." Marcus stared at her. "That's actually brilliant. That's survival." Arden rolled up the map. "I need to speak with Kyle. We're changing the tactical approach for the southern outpost ambush." She found the commander in the training yard, working through sword forms with a focus that spoke of barely contained violence. Sweat gleamed on his scarred arms despite the winter cold, and his blade moved with the precision of decades of practice. "We need to talk," Arden called. Kyle finished his sequence before turning to face her. "About?" "The ambush. I want to modify the objective from elimination to capture. We've been over this. Dead enemies can't reveal our position. But they also can't give us intelligence about what's really happening in Blackstone, about why the Eastern Coalition is so desperate to secure that territory through marriage alliance." Arden stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You said Celine is the daughter of the Alpha Supreme. That's not just any marriage. That's a strategic merger. What if there's more to it than border security?" Kyle's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that Ronan didn't just reject me for politics. He was maneuvered into it. Someone wanted me gone specifically, and the timing was too perfect." Arden pulled out a folded paper, notes she'd been compiling for weeks. "Look at the sequence. Celine arrives at Blackstone for the wedding negotiations. Within 3 days, I'm accused of poisoning her. Within a week, I'm exiled and Ronan's bound by honor to complete the marriage alliance or risk war with the Eastern Coalition. You think it was planned from the start? I think someone needed Ronan desperate enough to accept terms he'd normally refuse. And removing his emerging bond with an Omega, removing any emotional anchor that might make him hesitate, was part of the strategy." Arden's hands clenched. "I want to know who planned it, and why." Kale studied the notes, his expression unreadable. "Even if you're right, how does capturing a few raiders help?" "Because raiders need orders. Orders come from command structure, and command structure requires communication." Arden pointed to a specific note. "Blackstone uses Omega messengers for sensitive communications. They're invisible, easily overlooked, and no one suspects them of understanding what they're carrying. Capture the messengers, and we capture the intelligence. Risky. If even one escapes and reports back, then we'll deal with it. But right now, we're reacting to Blackstone's moves instead of forcing them to react to ours." Arden met his eyes directly. "You wanted me as intelligence officer. Let me do my job." After a long moment, Kyle nodded. "Modify the ambush plan. But Vera has final tactical approval." "Understood." Convincing Vera took 3 hours of argument that left them both exhausted and grudgingly respectful. The captain didn't trust Arden's motives, but she couldn't deny the tactical value of the intelligence proposal. They restructured the ambush around capture rather than kill, positioning warriors to cut off escape routes and incorporating nets and binding techniques instead of lethal force. "This better work," Vera said as they reviewed the final plan. "Because if we lose wolves trying to capture enemies alive, their blood is on your hands." "I know." The night before the ambush, Arden couldn't sleep. She lay in her small quarters, barely larger than the cell she'd been imprisoned in, but hers by choice, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, wolves would fight because of her plan. Some might die. And if she was wrong, if her intelligence was faulty or her strategy flawed, the compound would have every right to exile her again. A knock at her door interrupted her spiral of anxiety. "It's open." Kale entered, carrying 2 mugs that smelled of something herbal and soothing. He handed her one without comment, then sat in the room's only chair. "Can't sleep either?" Arden asked. "Never can, the night before battle." He sipped his tea, his expression distant. "I keep thinking about the wolves I'll lose, wondering if the objective is worth the cost." "Is it?" "Ask me tomorrow." He looked at her directly. "You've changed since you arrived. Harder, more calculated. Is that a problem?" "No, just an observation." Kale set down his mug. "When I found you in that storm, you were barely alive. Broken. Now you're planning military intelligence operations and restructuring our tactical approach. It's impressive. It's survival." Arden wrapped her hands around her mug, savoring the warmth. "You either adapt or you die. I'm tired of almost dying." "Good, because tomorrow might test that resolve." Kale stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Arden, whatever happens, you've earned your place here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." After he left, Arden finally slept. And in her dreams, she saw Ronan's face as she'd last seen it, cold, dismissive, empty of any feeling. She woke before dawn with her heart racing and her wolf snarling for blood. The ambush was set for midday, when the sun would be at its highest and visibility optimal. Arden positioned herself in the caves above the southern outpost alongside Kael and 20 elite warriors, watching as the remaining forces concealed themselves in the surrounding terrain. "Movement," whispered the scout at the cave entrance. "Northeast approach. I count 15 wolves, maybe 20. Arden's enhanced vision picked out the approaching figures. Blackstone warriors in full combat gear, moving with the confidence of wolves who believed they had the advantage. And behind them, barely visible, 3 smaller figures carrying supply packs. Omega support staff, just as she'd predicted. "Wait for my signal," Kael murmured into the communication stone that connected to all units. "Let them commit to the attack. We want them too engaged to retreat." The Blackstone Raiders reached the outpost perimeter and paused, their leader, a massive beta with gray-streaked fur, signaling for formation. They moved with military precision, clearly expecting resistance but confident in their superior numbers. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. "Breach in 3, 2, 1. The Blackstone Wolves hit the outpost like a hammer, smashing through the deliberately weakened defensive positions. The 6 warriors Arden had positioned inside fought back with enough resistance to seem authentic, then began a controlled retreat toward the outpost's center. "Now," Kael said quietly. The caves erupted with warriors who dropped from above like avenging spirits. Simultaneously, concealed forces surged from the surrounding terrain, cutting off every escape route. The Blackstone Raiders realized their mistake in seconds, but by then it was too late. Arden watched as Kael's forces executed the capture plan with brutal efficiency. Nets reinforced with silver threads entangled warriors who tried to shift. Strategic strikes to joints and pressure points disabled without killing. Within 5 minutes, the battle was over. 14 Blackstone warriors captured. 3 Omega support staff secured. 0 deaths on either side. "Impossible," Vera breathed from her position beside Arden. "We shouldn't have been able to take them all alive." "They weren't expecting it," Arden said. "Warriors train to fight other warriors. They don't train to counter capture tactics because it's considered dishonorable to take prisoners in pack conflicts. You manipulated their own code against them." "Yes." Vera looked at her with new eyes. Not respect exactly, but something approaching it. "Maybe you're not completely useless after all, Omega." The prisoners were transported to the compound's secure facility, separated into individual cells to prevent coordination. Arden waited until nightfall before approaching the detention block, carrying a tray of food and medical supplies. The Omega support staff were being held in a separate wing, better conditions than the warrior prisoners, as Arden had specified. She found them huddled together in one cell, 2 females and 1 male, all looking terrified. "My name is Arden Vale," she said quietly, setting the tray where they could reach it. "I was Blackstone Pack until 24 days ago. Then I was framed for treason and exiled by Alpha Ronin." The Omegas stared at her. The older female, maybe 40, with kind eyes gone hard from survival, spoke first. "We heard about you. Beta Marcus said you tried to poison Luna Selene." "Beta Marcus lied. I was framed because my bond with Ronin threatened the marriage alliance with the Eastern Coalition." Arden sat down outside the cell, making herself vulnerable, non-threatening. "I know what it's like to be used by wolves more powerful than you, to be blamed for things you didn't do, to be invisible until someone needs a scapegoat." "Why should we believe you?" the male Omega asked, but his voice wavered. "Because I'm offering you something Blackstone never did. Choice." Arden pushed the tray closer. "You can stay silent, refuse to cooperate, and be treated as prisoners of war. Eventually, you'll be ransomed back to Blackstone, where you'll face punishment for failing to prevent the ambush. That's pack law." The Omegas exchanged glances. They knew she was right. "Or," Arden continued, "you can talk to me. Tell me what you know about the Eastern Coalition's plans, about the marriage alliance, about what's really happening in Blackstone. In exchange, I offer you sanctuary here. Real sanctuary, where Omegas aren't invisible, where your skills are valued." "You're asking us to betray our pack," the younger female whispered. "I'm asking you to save yourselves from a pack that would sacrifice you without hesitation. Arden's voice was gentle but firm. You think Ronan cares what happens to Omega support staff? You think Beta Marcus loses sleep over your safety? You're tools to them. Useful until you're not. The older female's eyes filled with tears. We had no choice. They said if we didn't support the raid, our families would be demoted, stripped of rations. We have children, cousins, parents. I know. And I'm offering to get them out too, if you help us. Arden leaned forward. This compound has connections across pack territories. We can extract vulnerable wolves, relocate them to safety. But I need information to make it happen. They talked through the night, not an interrogation, a conversation. Arden shared her own story, her exile, her survival, and slowly the Omega support staff began to trust, began to talk. What they revealed made Arden's blood run cold. The Eastern Coalition wasn't just securing territory through Ronan's marriage to Selene. They were planning systematic takeovers of every pack in the Northern Territories, using marriage alliances to install coalition-loyal alphas. Blackstone was first because of its strategic position, but 6 other packs had already been targeted, and the Omegas who resisted or knew too much, they were being eliminated, quietly, permanently. There's a list, the older female, her name was Marion, whispered. Omegas who've been marked for removal. I saw it once, in Beta Marcus's office. Your name was on it, Arden, dated 3 weeks before you were accused of poisoning Selene. Arden's hands clenched. They planned my exile that far in advance? They planned your death. The exile was mercy, I think, or maybe they just wanted you to suffer longer. Marion's voice cracked. There were 30 names on that list. By now, most of them are probably dead. Arden forced herself to breathe through the rage. I need you to tell me everything you remember about that list. Every name, every detail. By dawn, Arden had filled 20 pages with notes. She brought them directly to Kael, who read through them with an expression that grew progressively darker. This is bigger than we thought, he said finally. If the Eastern Coalition is really planning to take over the Northern Territories, then every pack is at risk. And they're using Omegas as the first line of elimination because no one tracks Omega disappearances. Arden's voice was steady despite the fury burning in her chest. We need to move faster than planned. We need to hit Blackstone before the Coalition completes their takeover. We're not ready. We need at least 2 more months of training, supply gathering. In 2 months, 30 more Omegas will be dead, and the Coalition will have consolidated control over Blackstone. We move now, or we lose our window. Arden met his eyes. And I'm going with the strike team. Absolutely not. You're intelligence, not combat. I'm the only one who knows Blackstone's internal layout well enough to navigate it in the dark. I'm the only one who can identify high-value targets on sight. And I'm the only one with a personal stake in seeing this through. Arden's jaw set. I'm going, Kael. You can give me backup or I'll go alone, but I'm going. You'll get yourself killed. Then train me not to. For 3 weeks, Arden trained harder than she'd ever thought possible. Vera worked her through combat basics with a ruthlessness that left Arden bruised and exhausted every night. Other warriors taught her knife work, basic sword forms, pressure point targeting. She would never be an elite fighter. Her damaged feet and Omega physiology ensured that, but she learned to be efficient, deadly in close quarters. Impossible to ignore. You fight like you've got nothing to lose, Vera observed one afternoon, watching Arden spar with a younger warrior. That's going to get you killed or make you legendary. Not sure which. Does it matter? I suppose not. Vera actually smiled, a rare expression. You've got steel in you, Vale. I'll give you that. The strike team departed on a moonless night, 40 warriors moving through the wilderness with the silence of hunting wolves. Arden traveled with the main group, her feet wrapped in specially designed boots that accommodated her damaged toes and provided stability. She carried light weapons, 2 knives and a short sword, and wore armor that prioritized mobility over protection. They reached the Blackstone territory border at midnight. Beyond the tree line, Arden could see the compound where she'd spent 23 years of her life, the place that had been home until it became a prison. Last chance to back out, Kael murmured beside her. Not a chance. They moved in 3 teams. Kael's unit would create a diversion at the main gate. Vera's team would secure the Alpha residence, and Arden's group, 12 elite warriors led by Marcus would infiltrate the lower levels where Omega prisoners were being held. Arden led them through a drainage tunnel she'd discovered years ago while helping with repairs. It was barely large enough to crawl through, cold water soaking them to the bone, but it bypassed all defensive positions. They emerged in the basement level of the healing station, her former workplace. "This way," Arden whispered, moving through darkened corridors with the confidence of intimate knowledge. Detention cells are 2 levels down. They encountered the first guard at the stairwell. Arden's knife was in his throat before he could shout alarm, her hand steady despite the nausea rising in her gut. She'd just killed someone. Her wolf should be howling in distress. Instead, she felt nothing. They descended into darkness lit only by occasional torches. The air grew thick with the smell of fear and unwashed bodies. Arden counted doors as they passed, 3, 5, 7, stopping at the 9th. "Here," she breathed. Marcus kicked the door open, revealing a scene that made Arden's vision blur red. 20 Omegas crammed into a space meant for 5, all of them showing signs of abuse and starvation. Some were barely conscious. Others stared with hollow eyes that had given up on rescue. "Get them out," Arden commanded, her voice flat. "All of them. We carry anyone who can't walk." As her team began extracting the prisoners, footsteps thundered from above. Their diversion had been discovered. They had minutes before the entire pack converged on their position. "Move faster," Marcus ordered, but there were too many Omegas, too few warriors. They'd never make it back to the drainage tunnel in time. Arden made a decision. "Take them and go. I'll buy you time." "That's suicide. That's an order. Take them and go." She shoved Marcus toward the prisoners. "Get them to safety. That's what matters." Before anyone could argue, Arden ran back up the stairs toward the approaching guards. She was 1 Omega with 2 knives against an entire pack's security force. The math was simple and brutal, but math had never stopped her before. She met them at the 2nd-level landing. 6 guards led by a familiar face that made her smile with cold satisfaction. Beta, Marcus Thorne, the man who'd carved away her pack marking. "Hello, Marcus," Arden said softly. "Remember me?" His eyes widened in shock. You're dead. You died in the storm." Disappointed, Arden's knives came up. "Don't worry. I'm about to give you a chance to finish the job." She attacked before he could respond, her blades finding flesh with savage precision. Not enough to kill, she needed him alive, but enough to hurt. Enough to make him remember. The other guards rushed to his defense, and Arden danced between them with the desperate grace of someone who knew this was a death stand. She took wounds, a slash across her ribs, a blade through her shoulder, but she gave worse than she got. "You should have died," Marcus gasped, clutching his bleeding side. "You're just an Omega. You're nothing." "I'm the Omega who survived everything you threw at her." Arden's kick shattered his kneecap, dropping him screaming. "I'm the Omega who came back." More guards poured into the corridor. Too many to fight. Arden backed toward the stairs, preparing for her last stand. Then a voice roared from behind her. "Get down!" Arden dropped flat as Kael and 20 warriors exploded into the corridor, their assault overwhelming the Blackstone guards in seconds. Vera was right behind them, her expression furious. "You idiotic, suicidal, reckless!" Vera grabbed Arden's arm and hauled her to her feet. "We said backup, not sacrifice. The Omegas? Safe. Marcus got them out through the drainage tunnel. They're halfway to the rendezvous point." Vera's grip tightened. "Now let's get you out before you bleed to death from being heroic." They fought their way back toward the exit, Blackstone warriors converging from every direction. The compound had fully mobilized and their escape route was compromised. They were trapped. "Fall back to the healing station," Kael ordered. "We hold there until—" A howl split the night, primal, commanding, unmistakable. Alpha authority that made every wolf freeze instinctively. Ronan Black stood at the end of the corridor, surrounded by his elite guard. His eyes found Arden's across the distance, and she saw his shock, his confusion, his rage. "Arden?" His voice was barely a whisper. "You're alive?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Disappointed?" For a moment, everything hung suspended. Then Ronan's expression hardened into something cold and terrible. "Kill them all," he commanded. "No survivors." The corridor exploded into violence. Kael's warriors formed a defensive wedge around Arden as Ronan's elite guard surged forward. Steel rang against steel in the narrow corridor, the confined space turning the battle into a brutal close-quarters grind where technique mattered less than sheer viciousness. "Through the healing station!" Kael roared, his blade taking down two guards in a single fluid motion. "Now!" They crashed through the door Arden had indicated, tumbling into the familiar space where she'd spent years grinding herbs and treating wounded. The room was exactly as she remembered, supplies organized with meticulous care, patient beds lined against one wall, the faint smell of antiseptic and dried flowers. "Barricade the door," Vera commanded, and warriors immediately began shoving furniture against the entrance. It wouldn't hold long, but it might buy them minutes. Arden's mind raced as she clutched her bleeding shoulder. They were trapped in a dead-end room, with Ronan's entire pack converging on their position. The drainage tunnel was their only escape route, but it was 3 levels down and their path was blocked. Unless... "The supply chute," Arden gasped, grabbing Kael's arm. "The healing station has a supply chute that connects to the lower storage levels. It's how we moved heavy deliveries without carrying them downstairs." "How big?" "Big enough for a person, barely." She moved to the back wall, shoving aside a cabinet to reveal a metal grate. It drops straight down 3 levels. There's a canvas catch system at the bottom to prevent damage to supplies. "That's a 30-foot drop onto canvas that might not hold our weight," Marcus said flatly. "Better than fighting through 200 Blackstone warriors." Arden yanked the grate open, revealing a dark shaft that plunged into blackness. "I'll go first. If I survive, follow." "Like hell," Kael snarled, but Arden was already climbing into the chute. She dropped into darkness, her stomach lurching as gravity seized her. The fall lasted 3 seconds that felt like eternity. Then she hit canvas with a force that drove the air from her lungs. The material held, sagging deeply, but not tearing. "Clear!" she shouted up the shaft, rolling off the canvas as the first warrior dropped after her. One by one, Kael's strike team plummeted down the chute, each landing with controlled falls that spoke of training. Above them, the barricaded door exploded inward with a crash that echoed down the shaft. "Move!" Vera was the last one down, dropping with her weapons already drawn. "They'll figure out where we went in seconds." Arden led them through storage corridors she'd walked 1,000 times, her feet moving on autopilot despite the pain. Left at the medicine storage, right at the preserved foods, straight through the corridor that smelled perpetually of dried meat and leather. They were 10 feet from the drainage tunnel entrance when Ronan's voice stopped them cold. "Arden Vale." He stood alone at the corridor's far end, backlit by torchlight that turned him into a silhouette of controlled power. His elite guard were nowhere visible, which meant either he'd ordered them to stand down or this was a trap. Probably both. "Keep moving," Arden told Kael quietly. "Get everyone to the tunnel. I'll handle this." "You can't face an alpha alone. He won't kill me." Arden's voice was certain. "Not until he understands what happened. Go." Kael hesitated, then nodded. The strike team disappeared into the drainage tunnel, leaving Arden alone with the man who'd destroyed her life. Ronan stepped forward, and for the first time Arden could see his face clearly. He looked older than she remembered, harder, with new lines around his eyes, and a tightness to his jaw that spoke of constant stress. His scent reached her, and her wolf stirred with confused recognition before Arden ruthlessly suppressed it. "I watched you walk into that storm," Ronan said, his voice rough. "I felt the bond die. How are you alive?" "Spite, mostly." Arden kept her knives visible, but not threatening. "Turns out, I'm harder to kill than you thought. I never wanted—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "You were accused of treason. The evidence was overwhelming." "The evidence was fabricated. By Celine, by Beta Marcus, by whoever decided I was inconvenient to the Eastern Coalition's plans." Arden took a step closer. "You never investigated, never questioned. You just believed what you were told because it was easier than fighting for me. I had a responsibility to my pack. You had a responsibility to your mate." The words exploded out of her, all the rage and pain she'd been carrying for weeks finally finding voice. "The bond was forming, Ronan. You felt it as clearly as I did.
and you threw it away because some alpha told you it was politically expedient. You don't understand the pressure I was under. The Eastern Coalition threatened war if I didn't accept the alliance. Thousands of wolves would have died, so you sacrificed one Omega to save the many. How noble. Arden's laugh was bitter. Did it work? Are you happy with your political marriage? Does Celine warm your bed as thoroughly as she warmed your pack's coffers? Ronan's hands clenched into fists. Don't. Why not? You made your choice. You chose power over truth, politics over justice, convenience over... Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. You chose everything over me. Because I'm an alpha! Ronan's composure shattered, his voice rising to a roar. Because I have 800 wolves depending on my decisions. Because sometimes being a leader means sacrificing what you want for what's necessary. Then you're a coward. Arden's voice dropped to a whisper. Because a real alpha would have fought for the truth before condemning an innocent pack member. A real alpha would have investigated rather than accepting convenient lies. A real alpha would have protected his emerging mate instead of throwing her to the wolves, literally, to save his political position. Ronan stared at her, something breaking in his expression. I thought you were dead. When the bond died, when the scouts found no trace of you past the northern ridge, I thought I'd killed you. You did. The Omega who trusted you, who believed in pack justice, who thought loyalty would be rewarded, she died in that storm. Arden's eyes were hard. What came back is something different. What are you now? Someone who fights back. Movement exploded from the shadows as Ronan's elite guard rushed the corridor from both directions, the trap springing exactly as Arden had expected. She dove sideways into a supply room, Ronan's hand missing her arm by inches. Take her alive, Ronan commanded, but Arden was already moving. She knew this level better than any warrior, knew every storage room and hidden passage. She led them on a chase through darkened corridors, always staying just ahead, bleeding from her shoulder wound but refusing to slow. At the drainage tunnel entrance, Kael waited with weapons drawn. You took your time. Had to have a conversation. Arden practically fell through the opening, and Kael pulled her into the water-filled tunnel as Ronan's guards rounded the corner. Seal it, Kael commanded, and warriors collapsed the tunnel entrance with controlled explosives that sent stone and debris cascading down. They crawled through freezing water for what felt like hours, Arden's wounded shoulder screaming with every movement. By the time they emerged into the forest beyond Blackstone territory, dawn was breaking and the entire strike team was hypothermic and exhausted. But they'd survived. 20 Omegas extracted, 0 casualties on our side, and we compromised Blackstone's lower-level security, Marcus reported as they regrouped at the rendezvous point. I'd call that a successful operation. Successful is debatable, Vera muttered, eyeing Arden's pale face and blood-soaked clothing. Our intelligence officer decided to have a chat with an alpha while bleeding from multiple wounds. That's not tactical, that's suicidal. It was necessary. Arden accepted a blanket from one of the warriors, wrapping it around herself with shaking hands. Ronan needed to see that I survived, needed to understand that his convenient truth was built on lies. And did he? Kael asked quietly. He's starting to. The journey back to the Hollow took 2 days of careful travel, their rescued Omegas slowing the pace but refusing to be left behind. Arden walked among them, learning their stories, promising them safety, watching as hope began to replace the hollow emptiness in their eyes. Marion, the older Omega who'd first given Arden intelligence, stayed close, her presence a quiet comfort. You came back for us. No one ever comes back. I came back because you matter. Arden's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. Because Omegas aren't disposable, no matter what the packs say. And because I'm building something different, a place where being invisible isn't the same as being powerless. When they finally reached the Hollow's gates, a crowd had already gathered. Word of the successful raid had preceded them through runners, and warriors lined the walls to witness the return. Arden expected celebration. Instead, she found tension. A contingent of unfamiliar wolves waited in the compound's center, 15 warriors in formation around a female alpha whose presence radiated authority. She was middle-aged, battle-scarred, with eyes that missed nothing and a bearing that spoke of decades commanding respect. Commander Draven,
the Alpha said, her voice carrying clearly. I am Alpha Catherine Frost of the Northern Ridge Pack. I've come to discuss your recent activities. Kale's expression went carefully neutral. Alpha Frost. An unexpected visit. Is it? You raid a major pack's territory, extract prisoners, compromise their security, and expect no one to notice? Catherine's smile was sharp. The Alpha Council is concerned, Commander. Concerned that rogue activity is escalating toward open war. The Hollow doesn't answer to the Council. No, but you exist because the Council chooses to overlook your presence. That tolerance has limits. Catherine's eyes found Arden in the crowd, lingering on her wounded state and determined stance. And who is this? The Omega I've been hearing so much about? Arden stepped forward despite Vera's hissed warning. Arden Vale, former Blackstone Pack, current intelligence officer for the Hollow. Former Blackstone. Catherine's expression sharpened. The Omega accused of poisoning Celine Ashford, the one everyone assumed died in exile. The one who was framed to facilitate an Eastern Coalition takeover, the one who survived to expose the truth. Arden met the Alpha's gaze directly, refusing to show submission, and the one who just rescued 20 Omegas from illegal detention and systematic elimination. Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Catherine raised one hand for silence. Strong claims. Can you prove them? Yes. Arden pulled out a folded paper, evidence she'd grabbed from Beta Marcus's office during the chaos. This is the elimination list I told Commander Draven about. 30 Omega names marked for removal. My name is third from the top, dated 3 weeks before my supposed crime. She handed it to Catherine, who studied it with growing darkness in her expression. These names, I recognize half of them. Omegas from various packs who disappeared over the last 6 months. Catherine looked up sharply. If this is genuine, it's genuine. And it's not the only evidence. Arden gestured to Marion and the other rescued Omegas. These witnesses can testify to the systematic abuse and planned elimination of Omegas who threatened Eastern Coalition interests. This isn't rogue activity, Alpha Frost. This is exposure of pack-sanctioned murder. The silence that followed was absolute. Catherine slowly folded the paper, her expression unreadable. You understand what you're claiming? That the Eastern Coalition, one of the most powerful alliance structures in the Northern Territories, is systematically eliminating Omegas as part of a territorial takeover strategy. Yes. And you have witnesses, documentation, and survived victims to support this? Yes. Then we have a serious problem. Catherine turned to Kael. Commander, I need to speak with you and your intelligence officer privately. Now. They convened in Kael's office, the small space suddenly feeling very crowded with 3 dominant personalities occupying it. Catherine sat in the room's best chair with the ease of someone accustomed to authority, while Kael leaned against his desk with calculated casualness. Arden remained standing, her shoulder throbbing but her spine straight. Let me be clear about my position, Catherine began. I don't like rogues. I don't like wolves who operate outside pack structure. And I especially don't like commanders who raid sovereign pack territories without council approval. Noted, Kael said dryly. However, Catherine's voice sharpened. I like alpha corruption and omega elimination even less. If what you're claiming is true, and that list suggests it might be, then we're facing a crisis that threatens the entire pack system. So you'll help us? Arden asked. I'll investigate independently. If I find evidence supporting your claims, I'll bring it before the Alpha Council with a formal accusation. Catherine's eyes hardened. But understand, this will start a war. The Eastern Coalition won't accept these charges without retaliation. Packs will be forced to choose sides. Wolves will die. Wolves are already dying, Arden said quietly. They're just Omegas, so no one's counting. Catherine studied her for a long moment. You're not like other Omegas I've met. I'm exactly like other Omegas. I just stopped accepting that invisible means powerless. A small smile crossed Catherine's face. Commander Draven, your intelligence officer has steel. I can see why you recruited her. She recruited herself, actually. I just provided the opportunity. Kale straightened. What do you need from us? Access to your witnesses, copies of all documentation,
and a detailed brief on the Eastern Coalition's suspected activities. Catherine stood. I'll need 3 days to conduct preliminary investigations. If your evidence holds, I'll call an emergency council session. And if it doesn't hold, Arden asked, then you'll be branded as liars. The Hollow will be declared a hostile rogue faction, and I'll be forced to support military action against you. Catherine's voice was flat. No pressure. The next 3 days were the longest of Arden's life. She worked with Marion and the other rescued Omegas to document their experiences, compiled every piece of evidence from Blackstone, and prepared detailed briefings on the Eastern Coalition's operations. Warriors from Catherine's pack arrived to interview witnesses, their professional thoroughness both reassuring and terrifying. Every claim would be verified, every inconsistency examined. If even one piece of evidence proved false, the entire case would collapse. On the second day, unexpected visitors arrived at the Hollow's gates. 3 Omegas from different packs, the gate guard reported to Kael. They say they heard about the Hollow through underground networks. They're asking for sanctuary. Arden met them personally, 2 females and 1 male, all bearing the distinctive signs of abuse and fear that she'd seen too often. But they also carried something else, information. We heard you're fighting the Coalition, the older female said, her voice barely above a whisper. We want to help. Our packs are next on the takeover list, and Omegas are already disappearing. How do you know this? Arden asked gently. Because we're the ones who handle communications, who deliver messages between alphas, who clean offices and hear conversations we're not supposed to understand. The female's eyes held fierce determination beneath the fear. You want intelligence on the Coalition? We can give you patterns, names, schedules, everything Omegas see when alphas think we're invisible. By the end of the day, Arden had the beginnings of something revolutionary, an Omega intelligence network spanning 5-pack territories. Wolves who'd been dismissed as powerless were providing tactical information that no warrior could ever access. This is bigger than I imagined, Kael said that evening, reviewing the intelligence. If even half of what they're reporting is accurate, the Coalition has agents in a dozen packs. They're not planning a takeover, they're already executing it. Which means we're running out of time. Arden traced connections on the map she'd been building. Every day we wait, more Omegas disappear and more packs fall under Coalition control. Catherine needs to move faster. Catherine is 1 alpha. Even with evidence, she'll need council support to act. Arden's jaw set. We need to force their hand, make the situation too visible to ignore. How? Arden looked at the map, at the network of Omega contacts spreading across territories, at the evidence she'd compiled through weeks of careful work. An idea began forming. Dangerous, ambitious, possibly suicidal. But then again, those were her specialties. We expose everything publicly, not through council channels where it can be buried or suppressed, but through the one thing alphas can't control, the Omega network itself. She looked up at Kael. Omegas talk to each other across pack boundaries. We share information, recipes, healing techniques. What if we shared the truth instead? You want to spread classified intelligence through casual conversation? Kael's expression was skeptical. I want to make the Coalition's crimes so widely known that the Council has no choice but to act. Omegas in every pack talking about the elimination list, about the disappeared, about the takeover strategy. Arden's voice grew stronger. You can kill 30 Omegas quietly, but you can't silence hundreds once they start talking. It's risky. If the Coalition figures out what you're doing, they'll target me specifically. I know. Arden met his eyes. I'm counting on it. The plan took another full day to implement. Arden worked with her growing Omega network to craft messages that would spread organically through existing social channels. Information shared during market days, while trading herbs through messenger networks that connected pack territories. The messages were carefully worded to seem like gossip rather than intelligence. Did you hear about the Omega list? My cousin's pack lost 3 Omegas last month to accidents. The Eastern Coalition marriages always seem to happen right after Omegas disappear. Within 24 hours, the Whisper network had reached 12 pack territories. Within 48 hours, Omegas were comparing notes and finding patterns. Within 72 hours, the Alpha Council couldn't ignore it anymore. Catherine returned to the Hollow with an expression that mixed respect and exasperation. You couldn't just wait for official channels, could you?
Official channels were taking too long. Arden didn't apologize. How bad is the fallout? The council is in emergency session. Half the alphas are furious that classified information is spreading through Omega gossip. The other half are demanding investigations because their own Omegas are asking questions. Catherine's smile was grim. You've created a political firestorm. Good. Will they investigate? They don't have a choice anymore. Too many packs are reporting Omega disappearances. Too many families are demanding answers. Catherine pulled out an official document bearing the council seal. There will be a formal inquiry into Eastern Coalition activities, Blackstone Pack administration, and the circumstances of Omega eliminations over the last year. Arden felt something unlock in her chest. Not quite hope, but close. And me? You've been officially cleared of all charges related to the Celine Ashford poisoning. New evidence suggests she fabricated the accusations to facilitate political alliance. Catherine's expression softened slightly. Your exile has been declared unlawful. You're entitled to return to Blackstone with full pack rights restored. The words should have brought relief. Instead, Arden felt only cold certainty. No. Catherine blinked. No? I don't want to return to Blackstone. I don't want my pack rights restored. Arden's voice was steady. They threw me away once. They don't get me back just because it's politically convenient. Arden, Kyle said quietly, this is what we fought for. Your name cleared, justice served. Justice would be holding Ronan accountable for condemning an innocent wolf without investigation. Justice would be exposing Beta Marcus's torture practices. Justice would be dismantling the system that makes Omegas disposable in the first place. Arden turned to Catherine. I appreciate the council's acknowledgement, but I'm not interested in returning to a pack that valued me so little. Then what do you want? Catherine asked. Arden looked around the office, at Kyle who'd given her a chance, at the maps showing her growing intelligence network, at the evidence that Omegas could be powerful when given opportunity. I want to build something new, a place where Omegas aren't invisible, where pack law protects the vulnerable instead of sacrificing them, where wolves like me can exist without constantly proving we deserve to take up space. She met Catherine's eyes. I want to change the system, not return to it. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. The council won't like it. They'll see an Omega refusing pack reinstatement as dangerous precedent. Let them. Arden's smile was sharp. I'm done making myself smaller to fit their comfort. Commander Draven, Catherine said, turning to Kyle, your intelligence officer is either going to get you all killed or change the entire pack structure. Possibly both. I'm aware. Kyle's expression held something that might have been pride. I'm counting on the latter. After Catherine left, Arden stood at the window overlooking the compound. Below, rescued Omegas were beginning to integrate into Hollow life, learning to fight, to speak up, to claim space. More refugees arrived daily, drawn by whispers of a place where Omegas mattered. You could have gone back, Kyle said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Reclaimed your old life. Most wolves would jump at that chance. My old life was built on the lie that if I was useful enough, loyal enough, invisible enough, I'd be safe. Arden's voice was soft but certain. I'm not interested in that anymore. What are you interested in? Making sure no other Omega has to survive what I survived. Building something that values wolves for who they are, not just what they can do for powerful alphas. She looked at him directly. The Eastern Coalition wanted me gone because my bond with Ronan threatened their plans. They were right to be afraid, just not for the reasons they thought. Oh? They thought I was a threat because I might influence an alpha's decisions. But the real threat is Omegas realizing they don't need alpha approval to be powerful. Arden's smile was fierce. They created me when they tried to destroy me. That's a mistake they'll regret. Kale studied her. This Omega who'd survived exile, built an intelligence network, raided her former pack, and refused reinstatement to chase something bigger. You know they'll come for you, he said quietly. The Coalition, Blackstone, maybe even other packs who see what you're building as dangerous. They'll try to eliminate the threat before it grows. Let them try. Arden turned back to the window, watching the compound that had become more home than Blackstone ever was. I died in that storm, Kael. What came back doesn't scare easily. Below, An Omega trainee successfully completed a complex combat sequence, her instructor calling praise loud enough for the whole yard to hear. Another group gathered around Marion, learning how to document intelligence for the growing network. In the healer's station, rescued Omegas worked alongside Garrett, their healing skills valued and developed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even safe. But it was real. And it was theirs. And for the first time since her rejection, Arden felt something that might have been peace. The Alpha Council's formal inquiry took 3 weeks to complete. And in that time, Arden's Omega intelligence network grew from 12-pack territories to 23. Information flowed through channels so mundane that no Alpha thought to monitor them: market gossip, recipe exchanges, healing consultations. But beneath the ordinary conversations, a revolution was building. On the morning the Council announced its findings, Arden stood in Kael's office reviewing reports from her network when Vera burst through the door without knocking. "They're calling an emergency summit. Every Alpha in the Northern Territories, all Council members." And Vera's expression was complicated. "Witnesses from the Omega community. You're being summoned to testify." Arden's hand stilled on the papers. "When?" 5 days, at the Granite Hall in Neutral Territory. Vera's jaw tightened. "It's a trap, Arden. They'll try to discredit you publicly, make an example of an Omega who stepped out of line." "Probably." Arden carefully organized her documents into neat stacks. "I'm going anyway." "That's suicide. That's opportunity." Arden looked up, her eyes calm. "Every Alpha will be there. Every Council member. If I can present evidence in that form, with that audience, they can't bury it. They'll have to act." Kael entered the office, his expression grim. "You heard. I heard, and I'm going. Not alone, you're not." Kael dropped a travel authorization document on the desk. "I'm invoking commander privilege to attend as your advocate. Vera and Marcus will lead a security detail. If they try anything, you'll start the war we've been trying to avoid." Arden shook her head. "I appreciate the protection, but this has to be my fight. An Omega, standing before the Council, forcing them to acknowledge what they've been ignoring. They'll tear you apart. They'll try." Arden's smile was cold. "Let them." The 5 days before the summit passed in a blur of preparation. Arden worked with her Omega network to compile testimonies from 17 packs, documenting patterns of disappearances, suspicious deaths, and systematic suppression. Marion helped organize the evidence into a presentation that was both irrefutable and devastating. "You know Ronan will be there," Marion said quietly on the 3rd day, watching Arden practice her testimony. "Are you ready to face him?" "I've been ready since the night he rejected me." Arden's voice was steady. "He doesn't scare me anymore." On the morning of departure, the entire Hollow compound assembled to see them off. Arden wore simple but dignified clothing. Not Omega submission, but not warrior aggression either. She looked like what she was, someone who'd survived hell and refused to be defined by it. "Bring them down," one of the rescued Omegas called out, and others took up the cry until the compound rang with voices that had once been silent. The journey to Granite Hall took 2 days of hard travel through territories Arden had never seen. The hall itself was carved into a mountainside, a massive structure that predated modern pack politics. It had been neutral ground for centuries, the one place where Alphas could meet without fear of ambush or territory disputes. Guards at the entrance tried to separate Arden from Kael's group. "Omegas enter through the servant passages," the head guard said, his tone making it clear what he thought of her presumption. "I'm not a servant. I'm a witness." Arden met his eyes without flinching. "And I enter through the main doors or not at all." The guard looked to Kael, who simply smiled, a predator's expression that made the man step back. "She enters where she chooses." Inside, the grand chamber was already filling with Alphas and their retinues. Arden felt the weight of dozens of dominant gazes, each one assessing, dismissing, or radiating hostility. She walked with her head high, her damaged feet steady despite the old pain, and took her assigned seat in the witness section. Across the chamber, she saw him. Ronan sat in the Blackstone delegation, looking haggard and older than his years. Beside him, Celine Ashford radiated false concern, her delicate hand resting possessively on his arm. When Ronan's eyes found Arden's across the distance, something complicated flickered across his face. Arden looked away first. He didn't deserve even that much acknowledgement. Alpha Catherine Frost called the session to order, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations. We are gathered to address accusations of systematic Omega elimination, political conspiracy, and abuse of pack authority. The Council has reviewed preliminary evidence and testimony. Today we hear from the primary witness, Arden Vale, formerly of Blackstone Pack. Arden stood, walking to the central platform where all eyes could see her. The silence was absolute, heavy with expectation and barely concealed hostility. "State your accusations," Catherine commanded. Arden took a breath, then began. 6 months ago, the Eastern Coalition initiated a systematic campaign to control northern territories through marriage alliances and strategic elimination of threats. Omegas who possessed sensitive information, who had influence with their alphas, or who simply asked too many questions were marked for removal. She pulled out the list, holding it high enough for the entire chamber to see. This document, taken from Blackstone Pack's Beta Marcus Thorne, names 30 Omegas for elimination. My name appears third, dated 3 weeks before I was accused of poisoning Luna Selene. I was framed, exiled, and left to die. Not because I committed treason, but because my emerging bond with Alpha Ronin Black threatened the Coalition's plans. Uproar exploded through the chamber, alphas shouting, wolves rising from their seats, the noise deafening. Catherine slammed her gavel repeatedly until order grudgingly returned. "That's a serious accusation," said Alpha Victor Stoneheart of the Eastern Coalition, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you have proof beyond a convenient document that could have been forged?" "I have 17 testimonies from Omegas across Pack territories documenting disappearances that match the timeline and pattern." Arden gestured to Marion, who stood in the witness section with the other survivors. "I have survivors who were imprisoned illegally by Blackstone Pack on Coalition orders. I have communications between Beta Marcus and Coalition operatives. And I have the confession of a double agent who was blackmailed into providing intelligence." She laid it all out, piece by piece, building a case so thorough that even hostile alphas couldn't dismiss it. With each revelation, the chamber grew quieter, the initial outrage shifting to uncomfortable realization. "Furthermore," Arden continued, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart, "this isn't just about past crimes. The Coalition continues to operate. 3 days ago, 2 Omegas from Riverstone Pack disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Yesterday, an Omega messenger in Ironwood territory was found dead, ruled an accident despite evidence of assault." She turned to face Victor directly. "You're not just taking territory, Alpha Stoneheart. You're eliminating witnesses, silencing anyone who might expose your methods, and you're doing it because you assume no one cares what happens to Omegas." Victor's expression was ice. "You're a disgraced exile making desperate accusations to regain relevance. Why should this council believe anything you say?" "Because I'm not the only one saying it anymore." Arden gestured to the witness section, where 23 Omegas now stood, representatives from her network, each carrying documentation from their territories. Omegas across the north are comparing notes, sharing information, documenting patterns. You can dismiss one Omega as hysterical or lying. Can you dismiss 23, 50, 100? The silence that followed was profound. "You've created a network," Catherine said slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "An Omega intelligence network." "Yes, because individual voices can be silenced, but collective truth can't be suppressed." Arden turned to address the entire chamber. "For decades, Omegas have been invisible in pack politics. We've been dismissed as weak, irrelevant, disposable. But we see everything precisely because you ignore us. We know which alphas are corrupt, which betas take bribes, which packs are planning betrayals. Because you talk freely around wolves you think don't matter." She met Ronin's eyes across the chamber. "I survived exile because I learned to fight back. But I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to change the system that made my exile possible in the first place." Before anyone could respond, the chamber doors slammed open. A bleeding warrior stumbled in, his uniform marked with Eastern Coalition insignia. "Ambush," he gasped, falling to his knees. "Coalition forces are attacking the hall. They're trying to eliminate the witnesses." His words cut off as an arrow sprouted from his throat. Chaos erupted. Warriors throughout the chamber drew weapons as Coalition soldiers poured through multiple entrances. This wasn't a raid. It was an assassination attempt, precisely coordinated to strike, while every hostile alpha and damning witness was gathered in one place. "Protect the witnesses!" Catherine roared, but coalition forces were already converging on the Omega section. Arden saw it happening in slow motion, armed wolves descending on Marion and the others, intent on eliminating everyone who could testify. Her body moved before her mind caught up, her knives appearing in her hands as she threw herself between the attackers and her people. Her first blade took a coalition warrior in the throat. Her second caught another in the eye socket. Not clean kills, not honorable, but effective. Wolves who'd dismissed her as a weak Omega found themselves facing someone who'd survived worse than they could imagine. Kyle and his warriors crashed into the melee with devastating force, their combat style shocking the chamber's assembled alphas. These weren't pack fighters following honorable rules. These were soldiers trained for war, and they tore through coalition forces with brutal efficiency. Arden fought beside them, her damaged feet screaming but holding, her smaller size an advantage in the close-quarters chaos. A coalition beta came at her with a sword, and she used his momentum to redirect him into another attacker. A warrior twice her size tried to grab her, and she drove her knife through his instep before slashing his femoral artery. She'd never be the strongest fighter, but she'd learned to be the most viciously efficient. Across the chamber, she saw Ronan fighting with the controlled power of an alpha in his prime. But he was fighting coalition forces, not defending them. Whatever else he'd done, whatever mistakes he'd made, he wasn't part of this assassination attempt. The battle lasted 7 minutes that felt like hours. When it finally ended, 23 coalition soldiers lay dead or dying, their ambush broken against unexpected resistance. Victor Stoneheart stood at the chamber's far end, his expression cold fury. "This is treason. You've declared war." "You declared war when you tried to murder witnesses in neutral territory," Catherine snarled, her alpha voice making wolves throughout the chamber flinch with instinctive submission. "You've violated every sacred law of the Council. You're finished, Victor." "Am I?" Victor's smile was ugly. "I represent 12 packed territories. You'll start a civil war over the word of a disgraced Omega and some paperwork?" "No," said a new voice from the chamber entrance. "We'll start one over this." Celine Ashford walked into the chamber, her perfect composure shattered, her clothing disheveled. Behind her, held by two of Kyle's warriors, Beta Marcus Thorne stumbled forward with wild, desperate eyes. "Tell them," Celine commanded, her voice shaking. "Tell them everything." Marcus's story poured out in a torrent of fear-driven confession. How the coalition had approached him months ago with promises of power. How they'd planned Arden's elimination to secure the marriage alliance. How Celine had poisoned her own tea and blamed Arden. How 30 Omegas had been systematically eliminated across territories, their deaths disguised as accidents or blamed on rogue activity. And how Victor Stoneheart had personally ordered today's assassination attempt when he realized the evidence against him was too strong to suppress. "Why?" Ronan's voice cut through the confession, raw with anguish. He'd moved closer during the fighting and now stood just feet from Marcus. "Why frame Arden specifically?" "Because she would have stopped you from agreeing to the alliance," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "The coalition needed you desperate, needed you without emotional attachments that might make you hesitate. Arden was too close to you. She had to go." Ronan turned to Arden, his expression devastated. "I killed an innocent bond. I condemn my mate based on lies." "Yes," Arden said simply. "You did. I don't expect forgiveness." "Good, because you won't get it." Arden's voice was steady, final. "You had a choice, Ronan. When the accusations came, when the evidence seemed convenient, when everyone told you to accept the easy answer, you could have fought, could have investigated, could have trusted the bond forming between us. I thought I was protecting my pack. You were protecting your position. There's a difference." Arden stepped closer, and Ronan actually flinched from the cold certainty in her eyes. A real alpha protects the vulnerable, investigates before condemning, fights for truth over convenience. You failed every test that mattered. She turned to Catherine, dismissing Ronan as thoroughly as he'd once dismissed her. "Alpha Frost, I believe you have sufficient evidence now to proceed against the Eastern Coalition. I trust the Council will handle Victor Stoneheart and his co-conspirators according to law." "Indeed," Catherine's expression was granite. "Victor Stoneheart, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, violation of neutral territory, assassination attempts against council witnesses, and systematic Omega elimination. Your territories are forfeit, your pack standing revoked. You can't, Victor started, but his own warriors were already stepping away, unwilling to tie their fates to his crimes. Without pack support, without territory, he was nothing. Just an alpha who'd forgotten that power without honor was just tyranny waiting to collapse. In the days following the summit, the Northern Territories erupted into controlled chaos. The coalition fractured as member packs scrambled to distance themselves from Victor's crimes. 4 alphas stepped down or were forcibly removed when their involvement in the Omega elimination program was exposed. 17 Omegas were recovered from illegal detainment, and investigations opened into 63 suspicious deaths. The pack system didn't fall, but it bent and kept bending, as Omegas across territories found their voices and demanded accountability. Arden returned to the Hollow a different wolf than the one who'd left. The compound had changed too. What had been a sanctuary for 200 exiles now numbered over 500, with more arriving daily. Word had spread that this was a place where rank mattered less than character, where Omegas could be intelligence officers and warriors and healers without apologizing for existing. "You know you're famous now?" Vera said, finding Arden in her office 3 weeks after the summit. "They're calling you the Omega Queen. Wolves who want change are looking to you as a symbol." "I'm not a queen. I'm just someone who refused to stay invisible." Arden set down the report she'd been reviewing. Her network now covered 37 pack territories and was still growing. "How are the new recruits integrating?" "Better than expected, though we're going to need to expand the compound again. At this rate, we'll have 1,000 wolves by winter." Vera's expression was complicated. "You're building something unprecedented, Arden, a pack structure that doesn't follow traditional hierarchy. It scares the hell out of the Alpha Council." "Good. They should be scared." Arden stood, moving to the window that overlooked the training yard. "Change is terrifying for people who benefit from the current system. But for those of us who've been crushed by it, change is survival." Speaking of which, Vera pulled out an envelope bearing an official seal. "This arrived for you, from Blackstone Pack." Arden took the envelope, recognizing Ronan's handwriting on the front. She set it aside unopened. "You're not going to read it?" "Eventually, when it matters less." Arden turned back to her work. "Whatever apology or explanation he's written doesn't change what happened, and I have more important things to focus on than a former alpha's guilt." 2 months after the summit, on a crystalline winter morning that reminded Arden painfully of the night she'd almost died, a formal delegation arrived at the Hollow's gates. Not a military force, a diplomatic contingent led by Alpha Catherine Frost. "We need to talk about your future," Catherine said, sitting across from Arden and Kyle in what had become a proper conference room. "The Hollow has grown beyond Rogue Sanctuary. You're housing over 600 wolves, operating an intelligence network that spans the entire Northern Territories, and training warriors who could challenge any pack force. The Council can't ignore you anymore." "We're not asking for recognition," Kyle began. "I know, that's precisely why we're offering it." Catherine pulled out a document covered in official seals. "The Council is prepared to recognize the Hollow as a sovereign pack territory with full territorial rights and Council representation. You would be bound by pack law but granted autonomy in your internal governance." Arden studied the document carefully. "At what cost?" "Accountability. Your intelligence network would need to share information with the Council regarding threats to pack stability. Your warriors would be subject to the same rules of engagement as other pack forces. And you'd need to accept oversight to ensure you're not becoming the same kind of corrupt power structure you fought against." "Oversight by whom?" "A joint committee of alphas and," Catherine smiled slightly, "Omega representatives from various packs. Your network has made it impossible to ignore Omega voices anymore. We're adapting whether we want to or not." Kale looked at Arden. "Your call. This is your network, your revolution. What do you want?" Arden thought about the Omega who'd been exiled to die in a storm, about the wolves she'd rescued, the network she'd built, the system she was changing piece by piece, about Ronan's rejection and the death that had birthed her rebirth. "I want it in writing that Omegas and Council-recognized packs
have protected status. That any pack leader who orders Omega elimination faces immediate investigation and removal. That our voices count in decisions that affect our lives. She met Catherine's eyes. I want structural change, not just lip service. Done. Catherine extended her hand. Welcome to the council, Alpha Vale. The title hit Arden like a physical blow. I can't be. You've been leading this pack in everything but name for months, Kael said quietly. The wolves here follow you, not me. You've earned the title. Take it. But I'm an Omega. You're a survivor who built power from nothing. You're a strategist who changed the political landscape of the entire Northern Territories. You're a leader who wolves would die for. Kael's voice was firm. Designation doesn't define capability. You've proven that better than anyone. Arden looked at Catherine, who nodded. The council vote was unanimous. If you accept, you'll be the first Omega Alpha in recorded history. It'll cause controversy, resistance, probably outright rebellion from traditional packs. But given what you've already survived, I doubt that scares you. It should have. Taking the title meant accepting responsibility for hundreds of wolves, facing down alphas who would see her as an abomination, constantly fighting to prove her right to exist in a role that designation said she couldn't fill. But then again, she'd been doing that her entire life. I accept, Arden said, but I'm going to do this my way. No traditional pack hierarchy, no distinction between Omega, Beta, and Alpha status. Wolves earn position through capability, not birth designation. Revolutionary, Catherine murmured, but I expected nothing less. The paperwork will be filed within the week. Congratulations, Alpha Vale. After Catherine left, Arden stood alone in the conference room, staring at the document that made her officially what she'd already become, a leader, a power, a force that couldn't be dismissed or eliminated. She thought about Ronan's rejection, about the storm that should have killed her, about the countless times she'd been told Omegas were weak, disposable, irrelevant. She thought about the Omega who'd died in that storm, the one who'd believed in pack loyalty and alpha justice. And she thought about the wolf she'd become, forged in ice and blood and refusal to surrender. Her office door opened and Marion entered with evening reports from the intelligence network. Behind her, a delegation of newly arrived refugees waited for processing. Beyond the window, warriors trained in the yard while Omegas worked alongside them as equals. This was the future she was building. Not perfect, not easy, but honest in a way pack politics had never been. Alpha Vale? Marion said, testing the title with a smile. There's a situation in Riverstone territory you should know about. 3 Omegas have requested extraction, and the local Alpha is making threats. Then we'll extract them. Prepare a team. Arden moved to her desk, her damaged feet steady, her purpose clear. And send a message to the Riverstone Alpha. Tell him the rules have changed. Omegas aren't disposable anymore. He won't like it. He doesn't have to like it. He just has to accept it. Arden's smile was sharp. One way or another. That evening, as snow began to fall outside, gentle this time, beautiful rather than deadly, Arden finally opened Ronan's letter. The words were everything she'd expected. Apologies, explanations, requests for forgiveness. He'd discovered the full extent of the conspiracy against her. He'd ended his marriage to Celine and exiled Beta Marcus. He wanted her to know he'd failed her, failed them both, failed everything a true alpha should be. And at the bottom, in handwriting that shook with emotion, I understand I have no right to ask anything of you, but if you ever find it in yourself to forgive me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of it. You were meant to be my mate, my equal, my partner. Instead, I became your executioner. That shame will haunt me forever. Arden read the letter once, twice, then carefully fed it to the fire burning in her office hearth. She didn't forgive him. Maybe she never would, but she didn't hate him anymore either. He was simply a chapter in her story, the villain whose betrayal had forced her to become the hero of her own narrative. And that story was far from over. A knock at her door announced Kael's arrival. He entered carrying 2 mugs of tea, the same herbal blend he'd brought her the night before her first ambush, a lifetime ago. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her a mug. It's been a long day. Every day is long now. But Arden took the tea gratefully,
savoring the warmth. Thank you for everything. For saving me in that storm, for giving me a chance, for believing I could be more than my designation. I didn't make you anything you weren't already. Kael settled into the chair across from her desk. I just provided the opportunity. You did the rest. They sat in comfortable silence, two wolves who'd found purpose in building something better than what they'd left behind. Do you ever regret it? Arden asked quietly. Leaving your legion, faking your death, building this place? You could have stayed, tried to change the system from inside. No, because systems don't change from inside. They protect themselves, eliminate threats, maintain status quo. Kael's eyes were distant, remembering. Real change comes from wolves who survive being thrown away and refuse to disappear. From omegas who build intelligence networks because no one's watching them. From exiles who create something so undeniable that the old powers have to acknowledge it. From revolutionaries. From survivors. Kael raised his mug in a small salute. To surviving, Alpha Vale. Arden clinked her mug against his. To surviving. And to making sure others survive, too. As winter deepened, the Hollow, now officially recognized as the Vale Pack, though everyone still called it the Hollow, continued to grow. Arden's intelligence network evolved into something unprecedented, an Omega collective that spanned 43 pack territories, providing information, extracting endangered wolves, and quietly dismantling corruption wherever it appeared. Traditional alphas hated her, called her a threat to pack stability, a radical who threatened natural hierarchy. Some outright refused to acknowledge a pack led by an Omega, but wolves kept coming. Omega's tired of being invisible. Beta's exhausted by corrupt leadership. Even the occasional Alpha, who'd seen enough injustice to believe in something different. And slowly, like water wearing away stone, the pack system began to change. 6 months after the summit, on a spring morning that smelled of new growth and possibility, Arden stood before a gathering of the full Alpha Council. Not as a witness this time, as an equal. Alpha Vale of the Hollow Pack, Catherine Frost announced formally. You are recognized with full council standing and territorial rights. Your pack's unique governance structure has been accepted as valid under council law. Applause was sparse and grudging from traditional alphas. But the Omega representatives, now a permanent council fixture, thanks to Arden's revolution, clapped with genuine enthusiasm. Arden looked around the chamber, seeing the faces of wolves who'd dismissed her, doubted her, tried to eliminate her. She saw Ronan in the Blackstone delegation, his expression complex but resigned. She saw the empty seat where Victor had once sat, a reminder of corruption's price. And she saw her own wolves, Marion, the rescued Omegas, warriors who'd chosen the Hollow over traditional packs, watching with pride. I accept this recognition, Arden said, her voice carrying clearly. But understand, I didn't fight to join your system. I fought to change it. The Hollow stands for every wolf who's been told they're worthless, disposable, too weak to matter. We're proof that designation doesn't determine worth, that power without honor is tyranny, and that survivors can build something better from the ashes of what tried to destroy them. She paused, meeting eyes around the chamber. I was exiled to die in a winter storm. Instead, I survived and came back stronger. That's not just my story. It's the story of every Omega who refused to stay invisible, every exile who wouldn't disappear quietly, every wolf who looked at the pack system and said, "We can do better." The Hollow exists because change is possible. Remember that. The chamber was silent as she returned to her seat. Then, slowly, the Omega representatives stood in applause. Then Betas sympathetic to reform. Then a few progressive alphas. Not everyone. Not even most. But enough. That night, back of the Hollow, Arden walked the compound perimeter as she often did when she needed to think. Snow still capped the distant mountains, the same mountains she'd nearly died in a lifetime ago. She thought about the Omega who'd crawled through that storm, building fire with frozen hands, refusing to surrender even when death seemed certain. She thought about every choice since, joining Kael, building the network, facing Ronan, standing before the council. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd transformed survival into power, exile into revolution, invisibility into undeniable presence. Impressive view. Arden turned to find Kael approaching, his expression thoughtful. It is, she agreed. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I went from dying in the Badlands to leading a recognized pack in less than a year. You earned every bit of it. Kael stood beside her, looking out over the compound they'd built together. You know what comes next, right? Other packs will test you, try to prove an Omega Alpha is weak. The traditional powers will push back against every reform. It's going to be constant fighting. I know. Arden's smile was fierce. Let them come. I've survived worse than political opposition. That you have. Kael was quiet for a moment. The bond, though. Between you and Ronan, it was real, wasn't it? Before he rejected you? Yes. Arden's voice was soft. It was real, and he destroyed it for politics. Do you think, Kael hesitated, unusual for him, do you think you'll ever bond again? With someone who deserves you? Arden looked at him, seeing the question beneath the question. Kael had been her ally, her supporter, her partner in building something revolutionary. Somewhere along the way, respect had deepened into something more complex. Maybe, she said carefully, but not until I'm certain. Not until I've proven to myself that I'm complete on my own, that I don't need a bond to validate my existence. Fair enough. Kael's smile was understanding. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. I know. And she did. It was one of the things that made him different from Ronan. Kael offered support without demands, partnership without possession. Maybe someday, when she'd finished rebuilding herself completely, she'd explore that possibility. But not yet. Not when she was still learning to stand in her own power. A year after her exile, on the anniversary of the night she'd almost died, Arden stood on the same ridge where Kael had first found her. Snow fell gently around her, peaceful now rather than deadly. She carried a small bundle, her old pack marker, the one Beta Marcus had carved from her arm. She'd kept it, a reminder of what she'd survived. I thought I might find you here. Marion had followed her, wrapped in a warm cloak, her expression understanding. I wanted to mark the moment, Arden said. 1 year ago, I was a different wolf. You were dying. Yes, but more than that. I was a wolf who believed survival meant staying small, invisible, useful to others. Arden held up the scarred tissue. I thought if I was loyal enough, helpful enough, if I just accepted my place in the hierarchy, I'd be safe. And now? Now I know there's no safety in submission. No honor in accepting injustice just because it's traditional. Arden dropped the old pack marker into the snow. The Omega who believed those things died in this storm. What survived learned to fight back. She turned away from the marker, leaving it buried in the snow, a memorial to who she'd been and a reminder of why she'd never return to that version of herself. Come on, she said to Marion. We have work to do. They walked back to the hollow together, two Omegas who'd survived systems designed to destroy them, now building something better for the wolves who would come after. Behind them, the snow continued to fall on the Badlands, beautiful, pristine, and no longer holding any terror. Arden Vale had died in that storm. Alpha Vale had been born from the ashes, and the revolution she'd started was just beginning. Years later, historians would debate what really changed the pack system of the Northern Territories. Some credited the Alpha Council's reforms, others pointed to economic pressures or generational shifts, but the Omegas knew. They told stories of the Omega who'd been exiled to die, who'd survived through fire and ice and sheer refusal to surrender, who'd built a network that gave voice to the voiceless, who'd faced down corrupt alphas and changed the definition of strength itself. They called her the Omega Queen, though she'd never claimed the title. They said she'd proven that designation was just a word, that survival could become revolution, that wolves thrown away could come back powerful enough to reshape the world that had tried to destroy them. And on winter nights, when storms raged through the Badlands, young Omegas would gather to hear the story of Arden Vale, the wolf who refused to stay dead, refused to stay silent, refused to accept that invisible meant powerless. They would learn that sometimes the greatest danger to unjust systems wasn't the warriors who fought openly, but the survivors who built something better from the ruins of what tried to break them. And they would understand that exile wasn't always an ending. Sometimes it was a beginning,